Chapter 2898, Mana advances. The instant Feng made for the temple's exit, the mysterious youth took action. Now that the mysterious youth no longer had most of his strength and attention tied up with the fallen archangel, he had recovered to his peak condition. With a wave of his staff, he summoned 3 fourfold magic arrays around him. Tier 5 Curse World Severance. Tier 5 Curse Spacetime Seal. Tier 5 Curse Holy Spirit Collapse. Triple Silent Casting? Feng was thunderstruck when he saw the 3 magic arrays. In God's domain, the difficulty of silent casting a spell increased along with the tier of the spell. Even Tier 5 Divine Mages would have difficulty silent casting one Tier 5 spell, while double silent casting Tier 5 spells was something only the best among Tier 5 magical classes could accomplish. Moreover, this applied only to Tier 5 spells, not Tier 5 curses. Only Tier 6 gods could double silent cast Tier 5 curses. As for triple silent casting Tier 5 curses, Feng had no recollection of anyone ever accomplishing this feat in his previous life. Nevertheless, the mysterious youth had accomplished this feat before Feng could reach the exit. He suddenly found himself immobilized inside the void. In the end, not only was he forced to exit the void, but his mobility was also severely restricted by the surrounding space. A distorted barrier enveloped the entire temple hall. 6 pillars of light then appeared around Feng, forming an intricate magic array that caged him. Afterward, the ground lit up with a divine glow, causing the mana within the affected space to disintegrate rapidly. Just as the mysterious youth was about to obliterate Feng, the 5 dragons simultaneously chanted an incantation in the language of dragons. A 5-colored disk of light formed around Feng, isolating him from the outside world. Boom. When the divine light dissipated, Feng remained perfectly intact. However, the brightness of the disk of light protecting him had dimmed significantly as a result. Evidently, it could withstand only a limited number of attacks from the mysterious youth's Holy Spirit collapse. It wasn't an invincible defensive spell. The mysterious youth glared at the 5 dragons hatefully and said coldly, "A futile struggle. All of you will die here today." After saying so, the mysterious youth waved his staff, and the space within the temple darkened. Countless dark purple chains emerged from the void and instantly bound 3 of the 5 dragons, thoroughly immobilizing them. Only the leading bronze dragon and a fire dragon had managed to evade the chains' initial assault by relying on their skills. Feng had also managed to evade the chains, thanks to his 36 doppelgangers. However, now that chains surrounded the entire hall, he was in a tight spot. With World Severance and Spacetime Seal acting on the hall, even a Tier 6 God-ranked player would have trouble breaking out, let alone a Tier 5 player like Feng. It's all or nothing. Looking at the nearby distorted barrier, Feng gritted his teeth and used the light of 2 worlds as second skill, Golden Soul. After he had reached Tier 5, the skill had also undergone a qualitative transformation. Instead of providing a boost to his perception and control of mana, it now upgraded the quality of his soul. Activating the skill would grant him a soul bordering that of Tier 6 gods. However, activating this skill came with risks. When activated at Tier 5, Golden Soul would leave his soul in a weakened state for a short period once the skill's duration ended. A side effect like this would significantly impact a player's performance. This made Golden Soul a skill reserved for last-ditch stands. After Feng activated Golden Soul, his perception of the world around him changed completely. As if he was a 3-dimensional being looking at a 2-dimensional world, he could see everything around him with incredible clarity. The ambient mana also became an extension of his body, and he could freely manipulate it at will. It was much better than when he manipulated it using his mana domain. He had finally reached the level of actually manipulating mana. Immediately, Feng brandished the light of 2 worlds at the distorted barrier before him. Third Sword Holy Annihilation. Compared to the Holy Annihilation Feng executed before, the one he executed now had undergone a heaven-defying transformation. Now, even the space around him had become one with his sword. He felt as if he was swinging space itself at the distorted barrier. Boom. The distorted barrier shook violently from Feng's Holy Annihilation. A small crack also appeared on the barrier, although the barrier quickly repaired this damage. Now this is the true Holy Annihilation. I was mistaken when I tried to guide ambient mana using my own mana. Instead, I should have converted the ambient mana into my own mana. Only by doing so can I maximize my attack's power. Feng didn't despair when he saw the distorted barrier repairing itself. On the contrary, excitement burned within him. He finally understood how to progress to the next step of mana manipulation. Initially, he had used his own mana to force ambient mana into doing his bidding, an incredibly crude method of manipulating mana. Afterward, he had learned to guide ambient mana into doing his bidding. While this method had indeed significantly increased the power he could exert, it still wasn't the best method of utilizing ambient mana. Instead, the optimal way of utilizing mana was to convert ambient mana into his own mana. However, accomplishing this feat was easier said than done. Firstly, players needed to have an in-depth understanding of mana's operating principles. Secondly, players' concentration needed to be close to the Tier 6 standard. Only by having a near-solid mental will could players perfectly integrate their mana with the ambient mana. Players needed to have such a powerful concentration that they could project their will beyond their physical bodies and exert it over the mana surrounding them. Thirdly, players needed the ability to multitask to the extreme. The more mana players tried to influence, the more multitasking they had to do. If players wished to improve their ability to integrate and manipulate ambient mana, they had to keep refining their understanding of mana to reduce the mental burden from controlling mana. Meanwhile, after finding a clear path of advancement, Shifeng began frenziedly executing Holy Annihilation against the distorted barrier. Every time he executed Holy Annihilation, his control over mana also became increasingly smoother. Simultaneously, admiration for the heavenly blue Saint Eliade filled his heart. Holy Annihilation's use of mana far exceeded the basic standard. The basic use of mana only allowed one to create inanimate objects like the mana bridge. However, Eliade's usage allowed her to create living objects. Her technique, Holy Annihilation, basically modified ambient mana into a true extension of the body. If Shifeng hadn't reached the Grandmaster Magician standard, he would have never understood this concept. After he gained this understanding, every subsequent Holy Annihilation he executed was more powerful than the previous one. By the time he had executed 24 attacks, the colorful disk of light was close to dissipating. Fortunately, he had finally achieved a breakthrough. The next time Shifeng executed Holy Annihilation, a white light enveloped the world around him. Mana, space, and even the void disappeared. The next moment, a 30-meter-long gash appeared in the previously invincible barrier. The barrier failed to repair the damage and collapsed. So, this is what it feels like to employ the advanced method of using mana? Shifeng was startled when he saw the barrier generated by World Severance crumble. The attack he just executed had undoubtedly reached the Tier 6 standard, far stronger than even an attack using the Light of Two Worlds' World Breaker. However, after executing this attack, Shifeng felt his mind stagnate slightly. In his current state, he definitely couldn't execute the complete Holy Annihilation. Unless he upgraded his concentration to the Tier 6 standard, he could only keep this move as a trump card. As the distorted barrier shattered, the mysterious youth finally restricted all 5 dragons. He then sent his remaining chains after Shifeng. Upon seeing this, Shifeng promptly activated Void Shield, his last trump card, increasing his movement speed by 300%. Even under the suppression of the mysterious youth's spacetime seal, he still managed to escape from the temple instantly and flee the primordial ruin. However, the mysterious youth did not give up. Several hundred dark purple chains relentlessly tried to hinder Shifeng's escape. Every collision with a chain inflicted over 10 million damage. If not for Void Shield's protection, he would have died after receiving a few hits. After exiting the primordial ruin, Shifeng contacted Zero Wings members, who were close to dying to the evil blood monsters, and commanded them to leave the evil god's secret land immediately. If they got caught by the mysterious youth's chains, they couldn't die even if they wanted to. Although everyone was confused by Shifeng's command, they still obeyed it without hesitation and were out of the evil god's secret land in no time. As for Shifeng, because the mysterious youth's spacetime seal stopped affecting him after he left the primordial ruin, none of the dark purple chains could do anything to him. In less than 10 seconds he exited the secret land. 2 seconds later, the mysterious youth appeared by the secret land's exit, with an indescribably cold light in his eyes. When the mysterious youth failed to kill Shifeng, the restrained, leading bronze dragon laughed and said, "Scholar, how pitiful of you. Not only did your many years of planning come to naught, but you even let the cause of your failure escape. So what if he escaped? Do you think I can't do anything to him outside?" The mysterious youth did not get angered by the bronze dragon's words. Sending a calm glance at the bronze dragon, he said, "I will settle his debt with me eventually. So long as he is inside this cage, he will not escape my hands. I will also escape this cage sooner or later." After saying so, the mysterious youth waved his staff and turned the 5 dragons into ash. On the other side, Shifeng finally arrived back in the City Lord's mansion's control room. After staring at the evil god's secret land's entrance for some time, he breathed out a sigh of relief, thinking to himself, seeing as there's no reaction after all this time, I should be fine now. Shifeng did not wish to meet the mysterious youth a third time. The mysterious youth's combat power exceeded common sense. If not for the 5 dragons' assistance, Shifeng would have perished just now. Guild leader, what did you do inside the ruin? How are you level 172 already? Fire Dance asked in confusion after seeing Shifeng exit the secret land. Shifeng had only been level 167 when he entered the primordial ruin, yet he was now level 172. He had gained 5 whole levels in a matter of minutes. His leveling speed was out of this world. When Shifeng took a look at his own level, he too was slightly surprised. He never thought that killing a level 180 tier 5 fallen archangel would grant so much EXP. Not to mention he hadn't killed the fallen archangel by himself. What he had done was basically killsteal, so he hadn't received all of the EXP the fallen archangel granted. Yet he still leveled up 5 times. Through this, he could tell just how powerful the fallen archangel was. If he had come across her under normal circumstances, he would have died without a doubt. You killed a level 180 tier 5 fallen archangel? Guild leader, you're not lying to us, right? That's a fallen archangel we're talking about. Everyone was momentarily stunned when they heard Shifeng's explanation. They couldn't help doubting his words. Fallen archangels were existences rivaling divine dragons. A tier 5 fallen archangel was an existence standing at the apex of the current god's domain. A tier 5 player would be fortunate to escape a tier 5 fallen archangel, let alone kill one. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You of course not. Shifeng chuckled when he saw the skeptical looks they all gave him. What good would lying to you do? Moreover, I also grabbed some items that fallen archangel dropped. After saying so, Shifeng took out the 4 items he looted from the fallen archangel. As soon as he did so, the mana in the control room froze, and everyone gasped inadvertently. They all felt their hearts palpitating in fear in the presence of the 4 items, and they stumbled back despite themselves. Meanwhile, after Shifeng took a look at one of the items he took out of his bag, he too was stunned. Astonishment filled his eyes as he stared at the rainbow-colored crystal ball before him. An ancient god's eye? Chapter 2899, Ancient God's Legacy. When Shifeng brought out the ancient god's eye, he wasn't the only one surprised by the item's identity. Cold Shadow, who stood nearby, also widened her eyes in shock. She couldn't help looking at Shifeng, who had acquired this item, as if he was some kind of alien. An ancient god. Ancient gods were the oldest gods in God's domain. They were existences that had come into being along with God's domain. The many gods of later generations only managed to gain their strength because of the legacies from these ancient gods. However, after God's domain transitioned from the primordial era to the ancient era, ancient gods had suddenly disappeared from the world. In the modern era, barely any records mentioned ancient gods. However, according to those found in the modern era's libraries, a large part of the reason humans managed to rise up during ancient times was the ancient gods' legacies, which allowed the human race to give birth to many gods. Although the rainbow crystal ball Shifeng held was named an ancient god's eye, it wasn't actually an eyeball. Instead, it was an ancient god's legacy. It was a legacy that could help players reach tier 6. It was much stronger than the legacies of ordinary gods. No wonder that mysterious youth wanted to deal with the fallen archangel. Let alone a tier 5 existence, even tier 6 gods would covet an ancient god's eye. Realization dawned upon Shifeng as he looked at the crystal ball he held. Ancient god's eye. Divine artifact rank, consumable. This is a legacy item left behind by an ancient god. It records the ancient god's many legacies. Each activation of the ancient god's eye requires 1007 luminaries crystals. It can be activated up to 9 times. Once the activation limit is reached, all information recorded within the ancient god's eye will disappear. Current usage count, 0. Out of all the legacies available in God's domain, an ancient god's legacy belonged to the strongest category. If a player managed to grasp even a portion of the legacy, becoming a tier 6 god wouldn't be difficult. If a player managed to grasp a significant portion, becoming a god was practically inevitable. It was no exaggeration to say that this single ancient god's eye was worth more than 10 legendary weapons and the loss of the dragon summoning flute. However, Shifeng quickly suppressed his excitement and turned his attention to the 3 other items he looted. Although these 3 items were not as powerful as the ancient god's eye, they still radiated incredibly potent divine might. Even Fire Dance felt pressured by them, what more the other Tier 4 players present. That mysterious youth definitely won't let me off the hook after this. Shi Feng chuckled when he saw the 3 other items' identities. All 3 items were extraordinary. 2 were inferior divine artifact ranked materials, and 1 was an inferior divine artifact ranked consumable. One of the 2 materials was even a divine power source. As for the consumable, it was the ancient god's blood, an item that could elevate a non-player creature's growth potential and life rating. It was undoubtedly the most powerful enhancement item Shi Feng had ever seen in God's domain. The total value of the 4 items Shi Feng got from killing the fallen archangel was something he couldn't get even if he killed 3 or 4 Tier 6 gods. Shi Feng was also certain that these were all items that Mysterious Youth wanted. Now that he had acquired them instead, the Mysterious Youth would definitely take action against him at all costs. After a brief silence fell in the hall, Fire Dance reported to Shi Feng, Guild Leader, according to Liang Jing, the Outer Worlds NPC army has arrived on the eastern continent. Currently, it has split into 6 groups of over 30,000 Tier 4 NPCs and 4 million Tier 3 NPCs each. All of these NPCs are above level 150. As we expected, one of these groups is marching toward the Twin Towers Kingdom and Starmoon Kingdom. At their current speed, it'll only take them another 3 or 4 days to reach the Twin Towers Kingdom's vicinity. In the case of the Outer World superpowers, their forces have already gathered outside the Twin Towers Kingdom. They have even dispatched many scouting teams to invade the kingdom, and the kingdom's forces have already clashed with these scouting teams. Although the 2 sides are at a stalemate now, it is only a matter of time before the kingdom's side loses. According to Melancholic's investigations, Starlink and many other superpowers are offering excellent incentives to independent experts to have them head to the Dark Knight Empire and the Black Dragon Empire. They plan to resist the Outer World forces together with the 2 empires. Because of this, many independent experts have decided to abandon Twin Towers and Star Moon. When Fire Dance finished speaking, Cold Shadow frowned and said, "How foolish these people are. Sticking with an empire's defensive line might be a good choice, but abandoning all resistance in the various kingdoms will inflict a severe loss to the various kingdoms' armies. All they're doing is giving the Outer World forces an advantage." Unlike for players, resurrection was a very troublesome process for NPCs. The Outer World's NPC army wasn't endless either. Hence, if players worked together to defend the various kingdoms, repelling the Outer World forces was entirely possible. In the worst-case scenario, they could, at least, weaken the Outer World forces. Abandoning the various kingdoms outright and choosing to fight a decisive battle at the defensive lines of empires was an absolutely foolish decision. However, Shi Feng wasn't too surprised by this situation. Calmly he said, "This is normal. Although players can recover the levels they lose with a little effort, finding replacements for the weapons and equipment they lose is very difficult. Given a choice, they will naturally prefer a more stable battle. Not to mention, with Starlink and the other superpowers' interference, it's only natural for independent players to abandon resisting in kingdoms and choose to fight in empires instead." In his previous life, the most astonishing aspect of a war between countries wasn't the number of player deaths. Instead, it was the weapons and equipment lost. Many kingdoms and empires had suffered annihilation because the player forces in those countries had depleted their stockpile of weapons and equipment. As a result, the players of those countries became weaker and weaker as they fought. In the end, they could only watch their enemies annex their nations bit by bit until the country disappeared completely. The current War of Worlds was a similar situation. After realizing this fact, all Starlink and the various superpowers needed to do was put out appropriate bait, and the various independent players would automatically swarm to the bait. "Guild Leader, how about I bring the main force to the Twin Towers Kingdom and participate in the battle there?" Kola suggested. "I refuse to believe that we can't kill a bunch of scouting teams. So long as we secure a few victories, I believe many players will be willing to stay and fight with us." Although Kola didn't understand much about battles on the scale of countries, he knew that without the support of a large number of independent players, the Twin Towers Kingdom and Starmoon Kingdom would fall to the Outer World forces. The reason many independent experts were abandoning the 2 kingdoms was simply their belief that defending against the Outer World forces in an empire would be easier. Meanwhile, all Zero Wing needed to do was suppress and repel the Outer World players plaguing the Twin Towers Kingdom. Then, the independent players who had left would see hope for successfully defending the kingdom. Once that happened, they would definitely return to help in the kingdom's defense. After all, abandoning one's roots and restarting development in a foreign country wasn't easy. "That won't be necessary." Shi Feng shook his head. Smiling calmly, he said, Dealing with those scouting teams will only be a waste of time. If we're going to do something, we should go for something bigger. Bigger? Kola parroted in confusion. Fire, bring a team and look into the Twin Towers Kingdom's current situation. Make sure to find the base camp of the Outer World players invading the Twin Towers Kingdom. Once you do, notify me immediately. Shifeng instructed. When Cold Shadow heard Shifeng's words, she turned to Shifeng with a stunned look. Guild leader, are you thinking of wiping them out? Nodding, Shifeng said earnestly, of course. If Starlink and the other superpowers want to waste their time, let them. However, Zero Wing doesn't have that much time to waste. The real role of high-end combatants wasn't in defending strongholds but attacking the enemy's core combatants. In his previous life, any player force that dared to gather their troops into one big army was simply asking for death. However, be it the Eastern Continent's players or the Outer World's players, neither had a clear understanding of truly large-scale battles in God's domain yet. They were still acting as if they were playing traditional virtual reality games, entirely ignorant of just how much power a single individual could wield. I'll head out right away. Fire Dance grew excited at Shifeng's affirmation. After saying so, Fire Dance activated a guild transfer scroll and teleported to the guild residence at Sky Spring City. As for everyone else present, Shifeng had them take a break and dismissed them. After all, their continuous battles in the evil god's secret land had taken a huge toll on their minds and bodies. After settling his affairs here, Shifeng made his way to the City Lord's mansion's secret room to rest and recuperate. Shifeng had exhausted his concentration during his fight with the mysterious youth. Now even his soul was in a weakened state. To recover quickly, he had to rest in the City Lord's mansion's underground secret room, which held the densest mana in ancient Rock City. This environment should be enough. Now all I need to do is recover my concentration. After setting up a simple mana-gathering magic array, Shifeng took out a crystal of souls from his bag and ate it. Immediately, a wave of comfort spread across his soul. Once his soul had fully recovered, Shifeng fished the ancient god's eye from his bag. He then took out 1007 luminaries crystals from his dwindling stockpile and injected them into the ancient god's eye. During his fight with the mysterious youth, Shifeng had come to understand just how feeble he was. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Now that Shifeng had the threat of the mysterious youth and the outer world forces looming over him, it was best if he increased his strength as quickly as possible. Hence, he did not intend to strengthen himself before receiving the legacy guidance in the ancient god's eye. Instead, he would inherit it now to maximize his current strengths. After Shifeng injected the 1007 luminaries crystals, the ancient god's eye suddenly released purple fumes, which gradually seeped into his body and merged with his soul. The moment his soul came into contact with the purple fumes, Shifeng suffered a splitting headache, and an unprecedented heat spread throughout his body. He felt as if someone was trying to cram an endless amount of knowledge into his brain, and his brain was working overtime and heating up as it tried to process all this information. This sensation lasted for several minutes before it gradually dissipated. When all of the purple fumes from the ancient god's eye had merged with Shifeng's soul, the legacy guidance finally ended. Chapter 2900, Legendary Weapon. Even after the purple fumes in the secret room disappeared, Shifeng remained seated, unmoving like a statue. Only after more than a dozen minutes had gone by did he slowly open his eyes and take a deep breath. How close? Shifeng celebrated inwardly as he looked at the ancient god's eye. Had my concentration not reached the Tier 5 intermediate standard already, I would have most likely failed to absorb 100% of the legacy guidance. The ancient god's eye conveyed a massive amount of information. If his soul hadn't recovered to peak condition, he wouldn't have been able to accept all of the information. Meanwhile, if he missed out on even a small portion of the legacy, he would have failed and obtained nothing at all. But this is a surprise. I never thought that the key factor in getting promoted to Tier 6 would be 7 luminaries crystals. Shifeng sighed as he recalled the information he received. 7 luminaries crystals had always been a rare resource in God's domain, and this was true even in the ancient era. Although Shifeng had long since known that all organizations with Tier 6 God-ranked experts would frenziedly collect 7 luminaries crystals, he had thought that they had done so mainly to exchange for the Green God Company's products and construct their personal virtual space in God's domain. He never imagined 7 luminaries crystals had such a use as well. Now, Shifeng slightly regretted selling his 7 luminaries crystals. According to the ancient god's legacy, apart from having Tier 6 concentration and an excellent grasp of the world's laws, players seeking to get promoted to Tier 6 also needed an enormous amount of 7 Luminaries crystals to construct a divine body. Each attempt at creating a divine body required at least 50,000 7 Luminaries crystals. Moreover, this was only for the most common divine body. According to the ancient gods' legacy, divine bodies had two categories: ordinary divine bodies and superior divine bodies. Ordinary divine bodies were the most common in God's domain. Over 99% of gods and god-rank players had an ordinary divine body. Superior divine bodies, on the other hand, were much rarer. The divine bodies of the three goddesses rumored to have saved God's domain, as well as those of the war god, the god slayer, and many ancient gods, were at this level. Superior divine bodies were that rare because their creation required an individual to have ultimate mastery over a certain world law. This was also why individuals titled saints possessed the strength to contend against gods. Saints were mortals who had achieved ultimate mastery over a certain world law but did not become gods. In addition to this requirement, constructing a superior divine body cost 100,000 7 Luminaries crystals. And worse, players would lose all of the invested crystals if they failed even once. In contrast, the construction of an ordinary divine body occurred in stages. Even if players failed, they would lose only the crystals they invested in that particular stage. This gradual method also allowed them to know where they went wrong. However, that wasn't the case for the construction of a superior divine body, which was an all-or-nothing attempt. Players were required to spend all 100,000 7 Luminaries crystals in one fell swoop to construct their divine bodies. If they succeeded, then good. If not, then all of the 7 Luminaries crystals they invested would disappear. Currently though, Shifeng couldn't afford even the construction of an ordinary divine body. For current player forces, 7 Luminaries crystals are merely a commodity for the construction of personal virtual spaces or the acquisition of resources from the Green God Company. It shouldn't be difficult to obtain a large amount right now. Shifeng fell into deep thought as he recalled the information from the ancient god's legacy. Constructing an ordinary divine body shouldn't be a tough challenge, but a superior divine body is still far out of my reach. Achieving ultimate mastery in one world law is already extremely difficult. Not to mention, I also need to create the divine body itself. From the information he inherited, Shifeng already knew what a world law was. The so-called world law was basically a type of advanced usage over the various mana elements. An example would be the Heavenly Blue Saint's mana technique Holy Annihilation. However, only after one could manipulate the various elements of mana at an advanced standard would one master a world law. Simply being able to execute Holy Annihilation didn't cut it. Currently, apart from his inadequate concentration standard, so long as Shifeng collected enough 7 Luminaries crystals, he could already get promoted to Tier 6. The Heavenly Blue Saint's world law was the law of destruction, which covered the destruction of everything, even the most basic elements of mana. This was why Shifeng managed to break through the mysterious youth spacetime seal and world severance with Holy Annihilation. Had Holy Annihilation been based on any other world law, he wouldn't have escaped the evil god's secret land with his life. The bottleneck many demigods faced after mastering a world law was in the creation process of a superior divine body. This was because there were many methods to create a superior divine body, with the core principle being the integration of the mastered world law into their divine body. Of course, while this problem was incredibly challenging for others, the difficulty for Shifeng had been reduced significantly. The ancient god's legacy he absorbed recorded a basic flowchart for creating a superior divine body. So long as he followed this flowchart, his success rate would increase by 30 to 40%. One could say that the most important information recorded in the ancient god's legacy was this flowchart. Roughly 90% of the recorded information was related to it. In fact, 90% out of this 90% was the superior divine body's flowchart itself. This was also the amazing aspect of the ancient god's legacy. It was completely different from an ordinary god's legacy. While I currently don't have any methods to improve my concentration, I can focus on achieving ultimate mastery over the law of destruction. Although Shifeng wasn't yet confident of creating a superior divine body, he was optimistic about his chances of gaining ultimate mastery in a world law. After all, he could already utilize Holy Annihilation. So long as he perfected his use of the technique, he should reach ultimate mastery in the law of destruction. Moreover, his world authority had already reached level 1. He would have a much easier time perfecting the Holy Annihilation technique than other players. After Shifeng finished processing the information from the ancient god's eye, he took out the divine power source he had obtained. Shifeng grew a little hesitant as he looked at this divine power source. According to the ancient god's legacy, Divine power sources were birthed by the world and carried the world's power. They were incredibly useful in helping one understand world laws. In other words, by merging the divine power source with his body using a special technique, he could elevate his world authority. This would, in turn, allow him to understand world laws more easily. The ancient god's legacy also recorded this integration technique. Now that war is imminent, I should prioritize increasing my strength above all else. Gritting his teeth, Shi Feng had the light of two worlds absorb the divine power source. Shi Feng still wasn't fully confident of defending the Twin Towers Kingdom and Starmoon Kingdom against the Outer World forces. After all, his enemies weren't limited to just the Outer World's players. He also had to face the Outer World's NPCs. While the Outer World NPCs might not have Tier 6 gods in their ranks, they were bound to have quite a few Tier 5 NPCs. And in the case of Tier 5 NPCs, so long as their status in society was sufficiently high, acquiring a legendary weapon or equipment wouldn't be difficult. Take the Branch Temple Lord of Starmoon Kingdom's War God's Temple, for example. Despite being at Tier 4, he owned 2 legendary items. Meanwhile, the difference between having and not having a legendary weapon or equipment was massive for Tier 5 NPCs. Once the light of two worlds perfectly absorbed the icy cold tree branch Shi Feng held, it released a dazzling golden glow. The divine runes on the weapon's blade also lit up gradually. After several minutes, the divine runes on the sword's blade and hilt connected and became one. Boom. The next moment, the light of two worlds released a pulse of energy that made Shi Feng stumble. The magic barrier enveloping the secret room also shuddered violently and nearly crumbled. As expected of one of the 10 great legendary weapons. Strong. Shi Feng was stunned when he read the Light of Two Worlds' details displayed before him. Light of Two Worlds, one-handed sword, legendary rank, equipment requirement. Strength 20,000, Tier 3 attack power, 450% of strength, attack speed, 4% of agility, all attributes increases according to the user's level. When equipped, attacks gain the mana annihilation effect, causing a spatial collapse in an area of 4 by 100 yards. Attacks have a 50% chance to deal 300% damage. Attacks have a 20% chance to deal 500% damage. Attacks deal 300% damage to targets under Tier 6. Attacks carry the mana destabilization effect. Strength increased by 240%, agility increased by 210%, intelligence increased by 180%, endurance increased by 60%, attack speed increased by 200%, ignore levels plus 100, all sword type skills plus 2 level, up to Tier 6 peak. Power of all attacks increased by 2 ranks, up to Tier 6 peak. Effective mana increased by 150%. Additional passive skill World Power increases the user's life rating. Additional active skill 1 Spatial Slash, Tier 6 4-6 attacks, increases strength by 1,500%, power by 2 ranks, up to Tier 6 peak rank at maximum, and attack range to 5,000 yards. Cooldown, 30 seconds. Additional active skill 2 Golden Soul, Tier 6 upgrades the user's soul by 1 rank and world authority by 1 level, up to level 3, and reduces concentration consumption by 90%. Duration, 2 minutes. Cooldown, 1 hour. Additional active skill 3 World Breaker, Tier 6 consumes 10% of the user's concentration and mana to enhance the Light of Two Worlds, granting the weapon the power to break worlds for 1 attack. Forcibly increases the power of attack by 1 tier, up to Tier 6 peak rank at maximum. Cooldown, 30 minutes. Created by the ancient god of light. The Light of Two Worlds possesses the power to cut all things. Looking at the basic attributes the Light of Two Worlds provided, Shi Feng finally understood why people wielding legendary weapons could transcend tiers. A Tier 3 player wielding this thing could probably beat up Tier 4 players. While holding the Light of Two Worlds, Shi Feng inadvertently recalled the several heaven-defying feats that had taken place in his previous life. Back then, players who had been lucky enough to get their hands on legendary weapons while still at Tier 3 had actively hunted all sorts of Tier 4 players. While the legendary weapons those players wielded weren't as strong as the Light of Two Worlds, the basic attributes those weapons provided had still been more than enough for Tier 3 players to trounce Tier 4 players. Only Tier 4 players with highly developed mana bodies and several fragmented legendary items could contend against a Tier 3 player wielding a legendary weapon. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After Shi Feng equipped the Light of Two Worlds, his strength attribute instantly skyrocketed to 190,000. Now he was only slightly inferior to the average Tier 6 God-ranked player. Now I can put up a fight even against Tier 6 God-ranked experts. Shifeng's confidence rose as he looked at the weapon in his hand. Now, even if he had to go up against the mysterious youth, he wouldn't be completely powerless to resist. Following this, Shifeng began familiarizing himself with the fully recovered light of two worlds. After training for 5 hours, he received a call from Fire Dance. Guild leader, I found their base camp. They're hiding in the Shadow Forest, outside the Twin Towers Kingdom. Chapter 29:01 A Wind Rises in Twin Towers Kingdom, Shadow Forest. A 6-man scouting party led by a level 154, Tier 4 assassin slowly traversed the rainforest. Dark clouds hovered over the Shadow Forest all year round, shrouding the forest in gloom even during hot summer days when the sun shone bright. The mist enveloping the forest also hindered players' perception, and even Tier 3 experts familiar with the terrain would lose their way if they weren't careful. Commander, we've been investigating this place for half a day now, yet we haven't found any traces of the Outer Worlds player army. Should we take a look at the other maps? A blue-clad level 142, Tier 3 assassin suggested as he looked at a tree-lined gorge. With the War of Worlds imminent, many of the Twin Towers Kingdom's player forces had dispatched scouting parties to seize the initiative. Among the scouting party's duties, the top priority was investigating the exact state of the Outer Worlds player army. Many of the Twin Towers Kingdom's forces were offering astronomical prices for the information. If one managed to get detailed information on the Outer Worlds player army, one could receive not only a level 150 epic weapon for the information but also 200,000 credits. Hence, although many independent experts in the kingdom had fled to the Black Dragon Empire and the Dark Knight Empire, adventurer teams from the neighboring kingdoms and empires still dispatched expert players to investigate. The Sand Fox Adventurer team was one of them. The Sand Fox Adventurer team was well known in the Dark Knight Empire. Although Sand Fox's overall combat power was nothing noteworthy in the Dark Knight Empire, its scouting ability ranked among the top 10 of the Empire's adventurer teams. After the blue-clad assassin finished speaking, a level 136 assassin youth in the party suddenly jumped off the tree branch he stood on, and stopped moving. He then quietly observed the empty woodland in the distance. The assassin youth's actions alerted the rest of the party, and they promptly halted their advance, not daring to move even a muscle. Blade, is something wrong with that place? The Tier 4 assassin Sky Fox asked quietly as he looked at the assassin youth. The other players in the party also looked at the assassin youth curiously. The assassin youth, Blade Heart, had started playing God's Domain only recently, and his level was the lowest in the party. However, he possessed incredible technique and intuition. Often he would notice things that even their commander, Sky Fox, had failed to notice. This was why they had brought Blade Heart along on this scouting mission. After studying the empty woodland ahead for a while, Blade Heart said hesitantly, I can't say for certain, but my gut tells me something is there. What thing? Sky Fox scrutinized the empty woodland. However, no matter how Sky Fox looked at the area, he failed to see anything out of the ordinary. Even his high-ranking identification skill didn't come up with anything. That empty woodland was nothing but an ordinary forested region. Let alone players, he couldn't even detect any signs of other creatures. However, several minutes after Sky Fox and the others continued their observation of the empty woodland, they spotted a 20-man team approaching the woodland. This team was incredibly strong. All 20 members were Tier 4 players, and also above level 155. The most inferior piece of equipment they wore was level 150 dark gold equipment, and the team leader even had 5 pieces of epic equipment. These people should be one of the Outer World Army's scouting teams. Why are they here instead of investigating the Twin Towers Kingdom? Blade Heart was confused when he saw this 20-man team. The Outer Worlds player army had dispatched a lot of experts to harass and investigate the Twin Towers Kingdom. Many of the expert teams sent were led by Tier 4 experts. The 20-man team they were seeing now was definitely one of the Outer World Army's elite forces. The other players in the party also grew confused and curious about this situation. Logically, a team of such caliber should have been dispatched to investigate the Twin Towers Kingdom's inner regions and even cause a huge commotion in the kingdom. After all, the average player force couldn't contend against such combat power. Only first-rate guilds could possibly take on such a team. While Sky Fox and the others were wondering why this team was in this deserted location, the 20-man team suddenly stopped in the empty woodland. However, none of them got off their mounts. Instead, they simply stood there as if waiting for something. Roughly 10 seconds later, the space of the empty woodland became blurry, and a tear in the space opened up. A magic barrier? Almost all players in God's Domain knew of magic barriers. However, the scene that just took place still stunned Sky Fox and his team. None of them had known that magic barriers could be used in such a manner. Through the gap in the barrier, Sand Fox's members saw an ocean of players. From a rough glance, they could estimate that the barrier hid at least several 100,000 players. Moreover, they spotted many Tier 4 experts among those players. Why are there so many Tier 4 players? It's over. Twin Towers is finished. We won't have enough to defend against so many Tier 4 experts, even if we gather the players from the Black Dragon Empire and Dark Knight Empire. The information those superpowers obtained are completely wrong. The Eastern Continent is going to lose at this rate. Bladeheart and the others paled and despaired when they saw the player army in the barrier. Although God's domain had given birth to many Tier 4 players already, they were still incredibly rare. At this stage of the game, a kingdom was considered top tier if it had at least 300 Tier 4 players operating within its borders. Even the strongest empire didn't have more than 1,500 Tier 4 players operating within it. While these numbers might seem large, the player populations of kingdoms and empires were calculated in the hundreds of millions. There wasn't even one Tier 4 expert for every 100,000 players. Yet, from what they could see, the Outer Worlds player army before them had over 5,000 Tier 4 players. It was capable of destroying even the Black Dragon Empire and Dark Knight Empire, let alone the Twin Towers Kingdom. "Commander, what should we do now?" Bladeheart asked nervously. With so many Tier 4 experts on the Outer Worlds side, the Black Dragon Empire and Dark Knight Empire will definitely fall. Revealing a bitter smile, Sky Fox said, "What can we do? Our only option now is to notify the Black Dragon Empires and Dark Knight Empire's superpowers and have them gather the neighboring kingdoms and empires' Tier 4 experts. Otherwise, all of us will have to leave the Eastern Continent." "But will those superpowers listen to us?" Bladeheart asked worriedly. "Those superpowers are all focused on dealing with Zero Wing now, and they're hoping to see Twin Towers and Starmoon fall. Would they be willing to gather their forces to help defend the Twin Towers Kingdom?" "That's none of our concern." Helplessly, Sky Fox said, "Our job now is to spread this information and hope for the best." Truthfully, Sky Fox had already lost hope for the Twin Towers Kingdom. Nevertheless, he still felt that they needed to try defending against the Outer Worlds player army for as long as possible. That way, the Eastern Continent's native Tier 3 players would have more time to get promoted to Tier 4. However, when Sky Fox and his team were about to leave, a loud hum came from the distant sky. When the party sought the noise's origin, what entered their eyes was a crimson behemoth heading in their direction. Zero Wing? Why are they here? Could they have discovered the Outer Worlds player army already? Sky Fox and the others grew confused as they watched the Crimson Dragon flying ship approach. Nowadays, the Crimson Dragon flying ships were synonymous with Zero Wing. Almost no player in God's domain was ignorant of their existence. Now that one of these flying ships had appeared in this deserted location, the only explanation for it was that Zero Wing had discovered the Outer Worlds player army. In no time at all, the Crimson Dragon flying ship arrived and stopped above the empty woodland. Obviously, Zero Wing already knew about the hidden magic barrier. Is Zero Wing planning to attack the Outer World players? Bladeheart wondered as he looked at the flying ship. That's most likely the case, but Zero Wing probably doesn't know how many Tier 4 experts are hidden inside the barrier. It'll definitely suffer a loss afterward, Sky Fox said worriedly when he saw Sherfong walking to the flying ship's bow. The battle at Ancient Rock City had boosted Black Flame's fame. He was publicly recognized as God's domain's strongest player. However, even a Tier 5 Sword Saint stood no chance against a force of more than 5,000 Tier 4 players. After all, a Tier 5 player would still lose a lot of HP if they got hit by a Tier 4 player's attack. Not to mention these Tier 4 players came to wage war. They most definitely had combination skills and battle arrays prepared. As soon as Sky Fox finished speaking, the magic barrier enveloping the empty woodlands suddenly revealed itself. At this time, the Tier 4 magical class players inside the barrier had split into groups of 100 and were casting all sorts of large-scale spells, including Tier 4 defensive spells and offensive spells. These large-scale spells numbering more than a dozen were not the slightest bit weaker than the average Tier 5 defensive spell and offensive spell. A summoning array maintained by 600 players could also be seen in the center of the magic barrier. The summoning array was incredibly complex, making it impossible for outsiders to tell its rank. After these 600 players finished their incantation, the phantom of a 9-headed snake emerged from the ground. Tier 5. That's definitely a Tier 5 legendary monster. Although Sky Fox and his team didn't know what kind of monster the Outer World players had summoned, they could tell that it wasn't just a Tier 4 monster based on its aura. Aside from the rumored Tier 5 legendary monsters, they couldn't think of any other possibility. Facing such a monster, let alone one Tier 5 Sword Saint, even 2 or 3 Tier 5 players working together would fall. Upon seeing this monster, Sky Fox and the others couldn't help revealing looks of bitterness and despair. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EUA force of 5,000 plus Tier 4 experts was already plenty shocking, and it allowed them to realize just how wide the gap between the players of God's domain and of the Outer World was. Yet, reality now told them that the gap was far wider than they thought. The force of 5,000 plus Tier 4 experts was only the tip of the iceberg. However, unlike Sky Fox and his team, Shi Feng, aboard the Crimson Dragon flying ship, remained unfazed by this situation. He simply took to the air and arrived above the magic barrier. He then unsheathed the newly upgraded Light of Two Worlds. Disappear. Shi Feng brandished the Light of Two Worlds against the barrier. Holy Annihilation. Chapter 2902, Power of Tier 6. When Shi Feng brandished the Light of Two Worlds, a dazzling brilliance replaced the dark clouds overhead, and the sky itself descended to the ground. Boom, boom, boom. A series of deafening explosions rang through the forest, the effects of Shi Feng's attack stupefying Sky Fox and the others. With just one attack, Shi Feng destroyed all of the Outer World players' offensive spells, as well as the magic barrier protecting the Outer World players. Only after destroying several more defensive spells did the brilliance Shi Feng's attack generated begin to dissipate. However, the areas Shi Feng's attack passed through were now devoid of mana. Moreover, the resulting shockwave was so powerful that it reached Sky Fox's party several thousand yards away, sending the 6 players smashing into trees and stifling their breath. Isn't he a little too powerful? Sky Fox and the others were at a loss for words as they looked at Shi Feng. All of them could tell that Shi Feng's attack wasn't a skill but a combat technique. Nevertheless, he had managed to destroy all of the Outer World players' offensive spells and most of their defensive spells. Even the Tier 5 Imperial Knight I saw previously wasn't this strong. Bladeheart exclaimed. Is this the strength of God's domain's strongest player? Everyone in God's domain had already gotten a clear look at Shi Feng's power during the battle at Ancient Rock City. However, compared to that time, the power Shi Feng had just displayed was on a whole other level. The Tier 4 combination defensive spells the Outer World players used rivaled Tier 5 defensive spells in power. Even Tier 5 NPCs needed quite a few attacks to break through a Tier 5 defensive spell. Yet, Shi Feng had destroyed multiple Tier 5 offensive and defensive spells with just one attack. Such power was beyond even Tier 5 NPCs. Shi Feng was practically a god who had descended to the mortal world. Black flame, is it? Fighting spirit ignited in Bladeheart's eyes as he looked at Shi Feng. I'm going to become as strong as him one day. At this time, Sky Fox's party wasn't the only one shocked by Shi Feng's display of power. The millions of Outer World players were similarly thunderstruck. What? Why does this world have such a powerful player? He must be a demigod NPC in disguise. Even a Tier 5 player can't destroy so many large-scale defensive spells. Unlike God's Domain's players, the Outer World's players had a considerable understanding of Tier 5 existences. This was because there were already some Outer World players who had attempted to get promoted to Tier 5. Many superpowers had also clashed against Tier 5 legendary monsters before, with some even succeeding in slaying one. As far as the Outer World players knew, Tier 5 players could only hold their ground against legendary monsters. They couldn't solo one. Even experts at the Tier 5 peak standard couldn't. With so many Tier 4 players working together, they could heavily injure even a Tier 5 legendary monster, let alone a Tier 5 player. Hence, what just happened was simply unbelievable. However, unlike most of the Outer World players, the superpower executives in charge of the army reacted much more calmly to this situation. As expected of our primary target this time. I can see why 100 Ghosts is so afraid of him that they did not send anyone over this time, the 4-meter-tall man serving as the army's general said in commendation as he observed Shi Feng's hovering figure. No sooner had the giant man finished speaking than the female elf standing beside him said nonchalantly, "He might be strong, but he's facing the Weeping God army now. He still isn't qualified to fight us alone." Nobody present rebutted the female elf's words. Some of them even revealed excited expressions. 9-player armies had crossed the world passage this time, every one of them established by the various superpowers. The Weeping God army was one of these 9 armies, and heading it was Land of Gods, one of their gods domained 7 great guilds, with the support of 4 other superpowers. And out of the 9-player armies, the Weeping God Army ranked 3rd in strength. The reason behind the Weeping God Army's name was its successful slaying of an ancient demigod, an existence far stronger than even Tier 5 legendary monsters. This brilliant achievement was also why the Weeping God Army had accepted the task of taking down Zero Wings supporting kingdoms. Alright. Although it is a little early, we'll summon the 9-headed world snake, the general said. He then turned to the female elf surrounded by dense bloodlust and said, Wind, join the fight with your group as well. Let this world's natives know our power. Land of Gods had brought out their precious 9-snake summoning array to let all of God's domain's forces know of its power. This summoning array was also the main reason the Weeping God Army had managed to slay an ancient demigod. However, one had to pay a colossal price for each use of the summoning array, and it could be used only 4 times. Moreover, controlling the 9-headed world snake summon was incredibly challenging. The task required 9 players with excellent control over mana and 1 player with remarkable control over their physical body, in other words, an existence at the Beyond Domain realm. Anyone weaker than that would have difficulty controlling the world snake's gigantic body. The female elf named Nightmarish Wind nodded and led 9 Tier 4 experts with incredibly powerful mana domains to the summoning array. All 10 of them then jumped into the illusory 9-headed snake's body. Immediately, the illusory 9-headed snake grew more tangible. Its size also increased. In just 3 seconds, the 9-headed snake's body, which originally measured around 100 meters in length, had grown to 1,000 meters. Each of its 9 heads had also enlarged to the size of mountains. Moreover, each of these heads now held mastery over a particular magical element, and they could independently cast spells of their respective element. Black Flame. I heard you're this world's strongest player. Nightmarish Wind, who was hidden inside the world snake's translucent body, sneered when she saw Shifeng still standing his ground. Unfortunately, you're not going to leave this place alive today. After saying so, Nightmarish Wind had the world snake fly toward Shifeng. The power its body exuded was so strong that the space in its path shattered. Simultaneously, the world snake's 9 heads cast 9 different Tier 5 spells and launched them at Shifeng. This scene made Sky Fox and his team shudder in fear. The current 9-headed world snake radiated a much more powerful aura than before, so much so that it felt like a completely different creature. Even the Tier 5 NPCs they had come across previously couldn't compare to this monster. Meanwhile, in front of the world snake, Shifeng looked like an ant, as if the world snake could wipe him out of existence with a single swipe of its tail. The simultaneous bombardment of 9 Tier 5 spells was something even several Tier 5 NPCs working together would fail to stop. However, even after seeing the world snake's attack, Shifeng remained unfazed. He simply raised the Light of 2 Worlds once more and swung it at the world snake. World Breaker. Boom. For an instant, everyone on the battlefield felt the world around them disappear. Apart from an empty space filled with light, they could neither see nor feel anything around them. Everyone gradually recovered their senses, and once they did, they couldn't help gaping in shock, their minds going blank. Gone. The 9-headed world snake is gone. Moreover, the 9-headed world snake wasn't the only thing that disappeared. A significant part of the vast forest had also disappeared, and in its place was a crater over 4,000 yards in diameter, with the endless void in its depths. From the sky, it would seem as if something had just taken a bite out of the shadow forest. This sight rendered every surviving member of the Weeping God Army speechless. Even the army's general couldn't bring himself to say anything for a long time. After all, Shifeng's strike didn't kill just the 9-headed world snake but also over a quarter of the Weeping God Army. After falling into a daze for over a dozen seconds, the Outer World Army's general inhaled deeply and yelled with all his might, "Run! Everyone run immediately! He's no longer human!" This shout snapped the Weeping God Army's surviving members out of their daze, and they began scattering and fleeing frantically. As for the general himself, he took out a Tier 4 instantaneous movement scroll and teleported out of the area immediately. He had no intention of lingering for even a moment longer. Meanwhile, when Shifeng looked at the vast abyss in the middle of the forest, he couldn't help sighing ruefully. No wonder Tier 6 players rarely fought on the main continent. If 2 Tier 6 players clashed, they could probably erase an entire empire from the continent. World Breaker wasn't an AE skill. Even so, it had still wreaked such damage on the Shadow Forest terrain. This was something Shifeng never expected. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After dealing a devastating blow to the Outer World Army, Shifeng showed no interest in hunting down the fleeing players. That would simply be too tedious. Moreover, his attack had killed at least 70% of the Outer World Army's Tier 4 players, allowing him to level up to level 174. It was easy to surmise just how many Tier 4 and Tier 3 players he had killed. Meanwhile, players killed by a Tier 6 attack wouldn't be able to log into the game for some time. Even if a Tier 6 attack didn't specifically target the soul, it would still cause significant damage to souls. Hence, players killed by Tier 6 attacks would get barred from the game for some time, and their souls would fall into a weakened state for 5 or 6 days afterward. Shi Feng flew back to the Crimson Dragon flying ship and returned to Sky Spring City, leaving behind the fleeing Outer World Army and the stupefied members of Sky Fox's party in the Shadow Forest. Commander, what should we do? What else can we do? Hurry up and spread this information. We'll most likely need to rely on Zero Wing for this War of Worlds. Chapter 2903, Fame Shakes God's Domain. Dark Knight Empire, Winter Night Border Fortress. With the opening of the Second War of Worlds, the Outer Worlds NPC army had appeared at the borders of many of the Eastern Continent's kingdoms and empires. Although no full-blown battles had taken place yet, many skirmishes had occurred already. Guild Leader Lu, I'm afraid things will be troublesome this time. The Outer Worlds NPC army is much larger than we anticipated. Although the Outer World player army we have to deal with is much smaller than those at the other empires, we'll still face a tough fight, even if we work together with the Empire's army. Hidden Cloud, the 5th floor master of the Super Guild 9 Heavens Pavilion, said with a frown as he read the latest report on the Outer Worlds NPC army. If we can't even hold our side, there's no need to mention pushing back the Outer Worlds NPC army and taking Zero Wing's 2 cities in the Orc Empire. During the First War of Worlds, both sides had gathered all their forces at one location for a decisive battle. However, the Outer Worlds NPC army had acted differently this time, splitting into several dozen smaller groups and invading multiple kingdoms and empires simultaneously. Many of their targets were even empires holding strategic locations on the Eastern continent. The forces the Outer World NPCs had invested into this second war were on a whole other level compared to before. Thus, many of the Eastern continent's kingdoms and empires had no choice but to focus on defending their own territory. In this situation, even if the Twin Towers Kingdom and Starmoon Kingdom fell, Starlink and its several allied superpowers wouldn't be able to get the Eastern continent's various kingdoms and empires to retake Starmoon Kingdom. And if Starmoon Kingdom remained in the Outer World NPC's hands, taking Zero Wing's lost Ancient Rock City and Silverwing City would also be impossible. You can rest assured, Brother Cloud. According to the information I got, the several kingdoms neighboring the Dark Knight Empire that aren't under attack are already mobilizing their troops to the Dark Knight Empire, Lu Qindi said, assuaging Hidden Cloud's worries. Once these kingdoms' armies arrive, combined with the players we have here, defending against the Outer Worlds NPC army shouldn't be difficult. As for Zero Wing's 2 guild cities, it doesn't matter even if we can't acquire them fully as planned. Once the Twin Towers Kingdom falls, Zero Wing will have to beg us to help defend Starmoon Kingdom to keep those 2 cities. At that time, let alone obtaining shares to those 2 guild cities, we might even be able to acquire shares for Zero Wing City. After hearing Lu Qindi's words, Hidden Cloud nodded in agreement. Although there was a slight change to their plans, the overall situation remained in their favor. The Dark Knight Empire had an advantage in players over the Outer World army, so it wouldn't be difficult to repel the enemy. After all, players did not fear death, unlike NPCs. Moreover, the Dark Knight Empire had opened its treasury to players this time. Players fighting for the Empire would receive contribution points if they managed to kill the Outer World NPCs, and these points could be exchanged for weapons and equipment. Hence, the Empire's players no longer had to worry about running out of weapons and equipment. The only uncertainty left in their plan now was Zero Wing's decision. Zero Wing could either choose to monopolize Zero Wing City's benefits and abandon Starmoon Kingdom and its 2 guild cities in the Orc Empire, or give away a portion of Zero Wing City's benefits to secure Starmoon Kingdom and those 2 guild cities. However, just when Lu Qindi, Hidden Cloud, and the other superpowers executives present were about to continue discussing how to proceed in the current situation, a commotion suddenly erupted among the Winter Night Fortress's players. Moreover, it grew louder and louder as more time passed. This situation confused Lu Qindi and the others, who were holding a meeting atop the fortress's wall. Guild leader. Something big happened. Suddenly, a middle-aged man approached the group of executives hurriedly and arrived before Lu Qindi. This person was none other than Yi Kuei, Lu Qiandi's butler. At this time Yi Kuei had an anxious expression, his usual composure nowhere in sight. What happened? Why are you in such a hurry? Lu Qiandi asked in dissatisfaction as he looked at Yi Kuei. As his butler and secretary in the guild, Yi Kuei could be considered a representative of Starlink. Yi Kuei was simply embarrassing Starlink by displaying such uncouth behavior in front of the various superpowers executives. Yi Kuei hesitated to speak as he looked at the various representatives present. From Yi Kuei's hesitancy, Lu Qiandi understood that his butler had something very important to tell him. He then said, "If you can't say it, send the information to me." Immediately, Yi Kuei forwarded the relevant information to Lu Qiandi. Although this situation piqued the various executives' curiosity, none of them said anything about Lu Qiandi and Yi Kuei's exchange. After all, every guild had its secrets. However, roughly 10 seconds after Lu Qiandi began reading the information Yi Kuei provided, his expression changed drastically. He even failed to control himself and shouted his thoughts. Impossible. Lu Qiandi's loss of composure surprised the various superpowers executives. Lu Qiandi had criticized Yi Kuei for the latter's loss of composure just a moment ago, yet he was now behaving even worse than Yi Kuei. Just when the various superpowers executives were about to ask Lu Qiandi what information he had received, they suddenly received a message from their respective subordinates. The content of the message was simple, and it even came with a battle video attached. When the various executives played the battle video, what first entered their eyes was a man swinging a sword at one of the Outer Worlds player armies. However, the next moment, both a gigantic 9-headed snake and over 1/4 of the player army vanished along with a significant portion of the forest. Afterward, the remaining Outer World players scattered and fled the area. As for the man, he returned to the flying ship behind him and departed the area as well. A Crimson Dragon flying ship? Is he Black Flame? Questions and shock flooded the heads of the various superpowers executives. All of them were Tier 4 players, so despite the battle video's brevity, their eyes still managed to take note of every little detail in it. Although they couldn't see the 9-headed snake's information, based on the spatial fluctuations surrounding it, the monster was undoubtedly at the Tier 5 legendary rank. They also counted at least 4,000 Tier 4 players in the Outer Worlds player army, far more than what any single empire on the eastern continent had faced so far. Yet, Shifeng had not only killed the Tier 5 legendary monster with one attack but also defeated the army of millions. After several minutes of silence, the various superpowers executives snapped out of their daze one after another. However, their earlier complacency was nowhere to be seen, replaced by solemn expressions. Guild Leader Lu, I still have something to do, so I'll be taking my leave first. Guild Leader Lu, my superior suddenly called me back for a meeting, so excuse me. Guild Leader Lu. The next moment, the various superpowers executives gave all sorts of excuses and left the fortress in quick succession. Even Hidden Cloud, Lu Qiandi's staunch supporter, suddenly said he felt ill and logged out of the game to rest. In no time at all, only Lu Qiandi and Yi Kuei remained on the fortress's wall. Yi Kuei's complexion turned livid as he watched the various superpowers executives leave. He then asked Lu Qiandi, "What should we do now, young master?" The strength Shifeng displayed had already thoroughly exceeded their imagination. After the battle in the Shadow Forest, Yi Kuei could already foresee the Outer Worlds players abandoning their attack on the Twin Towers Kingdom and Starmoon Kingdom. Since the Outer Worlds NPC army had split into several dozen groups, mainly targeting the various empires, Zero Wing should have no problem defending the Twin Towers Kingdom. Not to mention Shifeng could solo Tier 5 legendary monsters. So long as he didn't foolishly rush into the NPC army's base camp, killing the Outer Worlds NPCs would be a cakewalk for him. In contrast to Zero Wing's situation, Starlink's situation was absolutely abysmal. If they went by the reactions of the various superpowers executives, these superpowers intended to abandon Starlink. We haven't lost yet. Lu Qiandi said as he sent a cold glare at Yi Kuei. Black Flame is the core of everything. So long as we deal with Black Flame, everything else will be simple. But Black Flame's strength is extraordinary. The Grandmasters the various corporations sent last time are still lying in the hospital, Yi Kuei said. Yi Kuei had received a fright when he heard this news back then. That was a force of 14 half-step Grandmaster and Grandmaster-level experts. Yet, these experts had actually lost. Moreover, according to them, Shifeng had defeated them all by himself. The strength he wielded was simply unbelievable. Moreover, the Grandmasters in the group even judged that Shifeng was most likely a mental strength master already. A mental strength master was an existence Starlink couldn't afford to offend, no matter what. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. At best he has just become a mental strength master. He is still far from a match for my teacher, Lu Tiandi said coldly. I don't know what happened, but my teacher suddenly became interested in God's domain recently and now wants to gain control over a powerful force in God's domain. He even told me to figure out a way to do so. My original plan was to annex Zero Wing for myself, but seeing as that's not possible now, I can give it to my teacher instead. With Zero Wing's current influence and resources, there's no way my teacher won't be interested. Moreover, Black Flame even got my senior brother kicked out of the upper zone. Given my teacher's personality, he will deal with Black Flame, even if Black Flame is now a mental strength master. Lu Tiandi no longer held any hope of annexing Zero Wing's resources. Nevertheless, he couldn't let Shi Feng off the hook so easily. After Lu Tiandi finished speaking, he assigned some tasks to Yi Kuei and logged off to contact his teacher. In the meantime, the various powers of God's domain had also received news of Shi Feng defeating one of the Outer Worlds player armies. The superpowers were shaken for a time, and their fear of Zero Wing skyrocketed. Some superpowers even began planning to convey good intentions to Zero Wing. However, Shi Feng wasn't present in God's domain to receive any of these good intentions, as he had promptly logged out of the game after returning to Sky Spring City. This was because today was the day he would receive his large mansion. Chapter 2904, Changing Times. Yuantian City's Upper Zone, Base Layer, Upper Class Mansion District. Brother Shi, I really have to congratulate you this time. This large mansion is the last one available in the base layer. You probably can't get another one in Yuantian City's Upper Zone even if you want to in the future, Han Yifeng said when he saw Shi Feng registering himself as the owner of the mansion in front of him. Looking at the three-story mansion, which occupied an area as large as half a football field, he couldn't repress his envy as he said, "You're only one of 3 people to own a large mansion as an individual in Yuantian City's Upper Zone." The base layer's 10 large mansions didn't just have the best position and environment. They also served as a status symbol. The only reason Han Yifeng got to stay in a large mansion himself was his status as the 5 States Corporation's heir. The other members of his family, even those with excellent performance, could stay in the large mansion for only a short period. In comparison, Shi Feng had purchased a large mansion all by himself. Moreover, he wouldn't have any people disturbing his peace. The heirs and heads of the base layer's various corporations would be green with envy once they heard about this. The last one? Shi Feng was a little surprised. Weren't there 2 left before? Did someone buy the other one during this time? They concluded the purchase yesterday, Han Yifeng said, nodding. Sighing ruefully, he continued, "Moreover, you might very well know the person who bought it." "I know them." Shi Feng grew even more surprised. There were only 10 large mansions in the base layer. Even a powerful organization like the Boulder Corporation didn't have the ability to purchase one. He found it truly hard to imagine that any of his acquaintances did. "You might not know her in real life, but you've probably heard of her in God's domain," Han Yifeng said, chuckling. "Does the name Endless Scars or Weiyang Qianhen one ring any bells? The Midnight Tea Party she belongs to is currently the target of recruitment of even the 5 great super guilds. Rumors say that she has already developed her mana body to the 120% completion rate, and she can probably get promoted to Tier 5 at any time." "It's her?" Shi Feng was startled. He had a general idea of Endless Scars' identity. He was sure that she was the princess of a major corporation and that she might live in the upper zone. However, he never thought that Endless Scars would hold such great strength in the upper zone that she could afford a large mansion. "It seems you do know her." Looking at Shi Feng's surprised expression, Han Yifeng smiled and said, "She's quite something. You can even say that she's astounding. She managed to buy that mansion this time not because of her family but because her senior brother gifted it to her." Gifted? Shi Feng was flabbergasted. He had spent a lot of 7 luminaries crystals to purchase a large mansion, and he didn't know how much time he would need to collect so many crystals again. "That's right. It's because she has incredible talent. A big shot in the middle layer recently took her in as his student. I heard that this big shot even paid a high price to borrow a middle layer reserve slot for her to help her break through to Mental Strength Master," Han Yifeng said, a hint of envy appearing in his eyes. "I have to admit that her talent is truly astonishing. She's been labeled the best talent Yuantian City's upper zone has seen in the past 100 years. Once she reaches the middle layer, she'll probably take only a few months to become a Mental Strength Master. And with her talent, beauty, and a middle layer big shot supporting her, she naturally became the target of pursuit of many of the upper zone's youths. One of them is Qin Bai, her senior brother. Qin Bai is also an extraordinary talent. He successfully broke through and became a mental strength master 2 years ago, the youngest mental strength master in Yuantian City's upper zone in the past 20 years. Because Weiyang Qianhen arrived at Yuantian City's upper zone only recently, Qin Bai bought a large mansion as a temporary residence for her to adapt to the lifestyle here. Having spoken up to this point, Han Yifeng, who was normally indifferent to his surroundings, betrayed some yearning for the woman named Weiyang Qianhen. After all, mental strength masters were incredibly rare, and a beautiful mental strength master was rarer. However, before Han Yifeng could fantasize for long, Shifeng interrupted him, asking, "Young Master Han, do I need to go through any procedures to let other people live in this mansion long-term?" Fang Shihan had transferred 10 upper zone reserve slots, and he had already assigned them to Fire Dance and the others. The ordinary housing unit he had couldn't accommodate them all. Meanwhile, one would enjoy vastly different treatment depending on whether one had housing or not. A housing status didn't just signify that one had lodging, it also determined the exercise equipment and food one could gain access to, among other things. Those without housing could only enjoy the most common training facilities and food. If one wished to eat better food or rent the upper zone's high-tech training facilities, one needed to have housing status. "There are some," Han Yifeng said, nodding. "All you need to do is register their identities at the Green God Tower. If you're not familiar with anyone there, you can come with me. It so happens that I also need to register someone to my mansion." At this point, Han Yifeng no longer dared underestimate Shifeng. In fact, he had even begun placing great importance on Shifeng. Shifeng's defeating multiple Henglian grandmasters all by himself aside, just the position and resources Zero Wing currently held in God's domain already made the guild worthy of befriending for the upper zone's various organizations. After all, 7 luminaries crystals couldn't be acquired easily in God's domain. "I'll have to trouble you then, young Master Han," Shifeng said. Although Shifeng understood Han Yifeng's motives, he didn't reject the other party's goodwill. His partnership with Han Yifeng might be a long-term one, as he was severely lacking in resources and trade points. Meanwhile, the 5 States Corporation possessed great influence in Yuantian City's upper zone. There should be a lot of things they could partner on in the future. Following this, Han Yifeng gave Shifeng a rundown on the basics of the large mansion. Then the two made their way to the Green God Tower. The Green God Tower's lobby was as crowded as ever. Members of corporations and internal members of the Green God Company were lined up, waiting to exchange for various potions. These people easily numbered over 1,000 and more were still joining the line. The situation at the housing registration counter wasn't the slightest bit inferior either. When Shifeng and Han Yifeng entered the exchange center, a young and beautiful girl wearing a short-sleeved t-shirt and denim shorts noticed them. She immediately strode over with her long legs and approached them in a sprightly manner. Upon seeing the approaching girl, Han Yifeng turned to Shifeng and said, "This is my younger cousin, Han Rongrong. The family recently decided to have her live in the mansion because of her talent." When Shifeng saw the lively girl in front of him, he was somewhat surprised. Firstly, it was because of Han Rongrong's talent. From what he could tell, the girl was only around 16 or 17 years old, yet she had already reached the half-step Henglian Grandmaster standard. Secondly, it was because Han Rongrong's appearance resembled the famous Chaos Witch of his previous life. Although Chaos Witch was labeled a witch, she didn't actually play a magical class in God's domain. Instead, she was a guardian knight. Unlike Gentle Snow and Phoenix Rain, who had risen to fame early on in God's domain, Chaos Witch had joined God's domain 2 years after its launch. However, her rise was rapid, getting promoted to Tier 5 in less than 2 years. She had also become one of God's domain's 12 sacred guardian knights and had been only half a step away from getting promoted to Tier 6. "Hello. My name is Han Rongrong. I heard a lot about you from my cousin. He says you're very strong. If there's an opportunity, we must have a spar with each other," Han Rongrong said as she looked at Shifeng with eyes sparkling with curiosity and fighting spirit. "Rongrong, stop messing around. Brother Shi can defeat even Henglian Grandmasters. Someone who isn't even a Henglian Grandmaster has no business challenging him," Han Yifeng said as he glared at Han Rongrong. After taking a deep breath, he continued, "Let's head to the VIP hall to get the residence registration done." However, Han Rongrong paid no heed to Han Yifeng's scolding. She even made a funny face at Han Yifeng. While following behind her cousin, she quietly observed Shifeng, the rumored extraordinary expert. The Green God Tower's VIP hall, located on the 22nd floor, was dedicated to receiving people of a certain status in the base layer. The base layer's average resident couldn't come here even if they wanted to. Only heirs of major corporations like Han Feng had the qualifications to do so. However, the so-called VIP hall wasn't anything special. It merely functioned as a specialized housing registration center. VIPs seeking to exchange for points and items still had to line up downstairs like everyone else. When Han Yifeng, Shi Feng and Han Rongrong entered the VIP hall, they found it nearly empty. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, upon seeing a group of 5 in the hall, Han Yifeng couldn't help tensing up. Of the 5, 4 were male and 1 was female. 3 of the 4 males were the top 3 rankers of the current contribution competition, while the last was a young man clad in white. As for the female, she was a beautiful young woman in a blue dress with an indifferent expression. Currently, the 4 males surrounded the woman. This woman was none other than Weiyang Qianhen, or Endless Scars, the person Han Yifeng mentioned earlier. When Shi Feng's group entered the hall, Weiyang Qianhen shifted her gaze toward them. Before Shi Feng and the others could react, she suddenly made her way toward them, causing Han Yifeng to widen his eyes in shock. Shi Feng, right? Or should I call you Guild Leader Black Flame? Weiyang Qianhen said, smiling faintly as she took in Shi Feng's dazed expression. You deceived me so badly before. Chapter 2905, High-Grade Authority. When Weiyang Qianhen finished speaking, both the men tagging along with her and Han Yifeng turned to look at Shi Feng in disbelief. Weiyang Qianhen's tone was gentle. Although her words sounded reproachful, they were actually intimate. Han Yifeng found this situation particularly unbelievable. He looked at Shi Feng as if he was looking at a monster, his mouth nearly failing to close properly. Weiyang Qianhen currently enjoyed a lofty position in Yuantian City's upper zone, far out of even the 5 states' corporations' reach. Many youths in Yuantian City's upper zone could only dream of getting acquainted with Weiyang Qianhen, let alone having her strike up a conversation with them. Previously, when Han Yifeng spoke with Shi Feng about Weiyang Qianhen, he thought Shi Feng only knew of the woman's existence. After all, the Midnight Tea Party was extremely famous in God's domain as one of the best adventurer teams in the game. Anyone with a reliable information network in God's domain would have heard of it. Han Yifeng never thought that the two of them were actually acquaintances and shared a good relationship. Meanwhile, in response to Weiyang Qianhen's questioning, Shi Feng smiled bitterly and said, "It seems I've made a fool of myself in front of Miss Weiyang. However, I was forced by circumstances to hide my true identity back then." You sure know how to act mature, Weiyang Qianhen said sourly. Previously, she had thought Shi Feng was older than her, at least in his 30s, which explained how he came to possess such incredible strength. Afterward, she had constantly thought of surpassing Shi Feng one day, going as far as to leave the Midnight Tea Party for a long period to train like crazy. After all, Shi Feng had given her a lot of surprises during their initial meeting. She never thought a person could become so powerful. However, just when she thought she was catching up to Shi Feng, she received a shocking piece of news. Black Flame's true identity was actually that of a young man who wasn't even 25. Moreover, he was a bona fide self-made expert who didn't possess the slightest bit of background or expert guidance. She had fallen into depression for quite some time after learning about this. Shi Feng laughed blankly at Weiyang Qianhen's comment. In reality, it wasn't wrong to say that he was a man in his 30s. After all, he had been one when he reincarnated. It's been a while since we met, and it seems you've undergone an amazing transformation. You're now a celebrity in Yuantian City's upper zone. Me? That's where you are wrong. Weiyang Qianhen shook her head. She then pointed at the white-clad youth nearby and said, "I'd better introduce you to my senior brother." When Weiyang Qianhen said the words, "senior brother," she deliberately emphasized the word, "senior," causing the white-clad youth to smile bitterly before walking over. And this is... When Shi Feng looked at Qin Bai, he found the white-clad youth somewhat familiar. He felt as if he had met the other party somewhere before, yet he couldn't recall where. "Hello, Guild Leader Black Flame. We meet again," Qin Bai greeted with a smile. "Again? Have we met before?" Shi Feng grew confused when he saw Qin Bai greeting him like an old acquaintance. "Of course you've met. He likes to act mature exactly like you," Weiyang Qianhen said as she glared at Qin Bai, gritting her teeth slightly. Smiling awkwardly, Qin Bai said, "Let me introduce myself. You can call me by my real name, Qin Bai. You can also call me by my game ID, Breeze Wine." "Breeze Wine? You're Breeze Wine?" Shi Feng was startled when he heard Qin Bai's words. Breeze Wine was the Midnight Tea Party's commander, someone Shi Feng had met and was relatively familiar with. However, the white-clad youth in front of him had a completely different look and bearing from Breeze Wine's wildness and boldness. While Shi Feng was feeling surprised, Han Feng, who stood beside him, was deeply shocked. Qin Bai was not only a mental strength master but also the youngest mental strength master in Yuantian City's upper zone. Who would have thought that a mental strength master was actually the commander of a 20-man adventurer team? Yet, God's Domain's various super first-rate guilds and super guilds had ignorantly used threats against the Midnight Tea Party to recruit the adventurer team. Those superpowers were simply tired of living. Don't mind it, Qin Bai said awkwardly when he saw the surprise on Shi Feng's face. I wasn't hiding it. Playing God's Domain is just one of my hobbies. After hearing Qin Bai's introduction, Shi Feng finally understood how Weiyang Qianhen managed to catch the eye of a middle-layer big shot. It was very likely due to Qin Bai's introduction. Shi Feng also understood why the Midnight Tea Party wasn't afraid of the various superpowers and could continue existing all this time. With Qin Bai's status, which superpower in God's Domain would dare offend him? Seeing Shi Feng in deep thought, Qin Bai took the initiative to say, Guild Leader Black Flame, you and your friends must be here to register your housing status as well, right? We are also here to deal with housing matters. Why don't we get it done together? I'll be in your care then, Shi Feng said, accepting the offer. There were still a few people lined up, waiting to get their business done in the hall. If Qin Bai was willing to help expedite the procedure, it was naturally good news for Shi Feng. After all, the sooner he got Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose into the large mansion, the sooner he could alleviate the stress on their mind. Naturally, Han Feng also didn't refuse the offer. He wanted nothing more than to establish a connection with Qin Bai right now. Although the Five States Corporation had a solid foundation in the base layer, the influence the corporation held in the upper zone was still insignificant compared to Qin Bai's. If Han Feng could get acquainted with Qin Bai now, he would have an easier time when he entered the middle layer. After all, the middle layer wasn't an easy place to survive in. The competition there was even fiercer than in the base layer. Subsequently, the group had all its needs taken care of in less than 10 minutes. When the group arrived at the Green God Tower's entrance and was about to part ways, a commotion erupted from the street outside. The next moment, a maglev car suddenly descended from the sky and landed in front of the entrance, catching the attention of all the nearby pedestrians. Although the upper zone allowed residents to drive their own cars, that was limited to road use. Cars were prohibited from flying. The only ones allowed to do so were people with very high status in the upper zone. After the maglev car parked in front of the Green God Tower's entrance, two people, one young and one old, emerged from it. The young man was none other than Lu Tiandi, Starline Corporation's current heir. However, Lu Tiandi showed none of his usual arrogance, standing humbly and respectfully behind the black-robed elderly man. At this old man's appearance, many of the corporation heirs present gasped reflexively. Han Feng's expression even paled when he saw the man. Why would he come here personally? Han Feng's eyes were filled with disbelief as he looked at the approaching black-clad elder. This was because the black-clad old man was none other than the Infinity Master of Haitian City's upper zone, a mental strength master holding 2-star high-grade authority in the upper zone. In the upper zone, the Green God Company would award anyone who had become mental strength masters with high-grade authority and permanent residence in the upper zone's middle layer. However, as mental strength masters were not equal, high-grade authority was also categorized into different ranks, from 1 star to 3 stars. Most mental strength masters in the upper zone held only 1-star high-grade authority, with only a small number holding 2-star high-grade authority. For 2-star authority holders, their position in the middle layer rivaled the middle layer's general managers. The Green God Company awarded those who reached 2-star authority with 1 permanent reserve slot for the middle layer and the authority to banish disrespectful mental strength masters from the upper zone for a duration of 1 to 3 years. Meanwhile, Han Feng knew that the Infinity Master, Fu Jiuzhong, held a slight grudge against Shi Feng. However, in his opinion, someone like Fu Jiuzhong had no reason to take action personally. At most, the Infinity Master would send some of his subordinates to harass Shi Feng. Doing more wouldn't be befitting of his status. Yet, contrary to Han Feng's expectations, Fu Jiuzhong had made a personal visit to Yuantian City's upper zone. After arriving before Shi Feng, Fu Jiuzhong demanded with a lofty aura, "Are you Shi Feng? The one who caused my student Wang Xianming to get kicked out of the upper zone?" When Fu Jiuzhong finished speaking, the surrounding passers-by couldn't help looking at Shi Feng with pity. At the same time, They also wondered who Shi Feng was to warrant the Infinity Master's direct intervention. Moreover, based on Fu Jiuzhong's tone, if this situation wasn't handled properly, he might very well utilize his authority to banish Shi Feng from the upper zone for some time. And once outside the safe zone known as the upper zone, Shi Feng was unlikely to keep his life. At this time, Qin Bai stepped forward with a smile and said, "Master Fu, this person here is my friend. Is there perhaps a misunderstanding here?" "Misunderstanding? I don't think so." Glancing at Qin Bai, Fu Jiuzhong said, "Also, you'd best not interfere in this matter. I don't care even if you have your teacher's support. Master Fu, although you have 2-star high-grade authority, this is Yuantian City's upper zone," Qin Bai said with a solemn look. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qin Bai felt a little helpless against Fu Jiuzhong right now. He was but an entry mental strength master, no match for a veteran like Fu Jiuzhong. Only his teacher could possibly put up a fight against the Infinity Master. After all, the 2-star high-grade authority wasn't just a status symbol for a mental strength master. It also symbolized strength. So what? Fu Jiuzhong sneered. "Let alone you, even if your teacher personally shows up now, I still won't give a damn. You." Qin Bai was helpless at the moment. If Fu Jiuzhong intended to abuse his authority now, Bai Qini wouldn't be able to do anything about it with only his 1-star high-grade authority. After all, these were the Green God Company's rules. As for what kind of excuse Fu Jiuzhong would give to get the Green God Company to banish Shi Feng from the upper zone, he could simply trump up random offenses. However, as Qin Bai was thinking of how to buy time and get his teacher to come and help, Shi Feng suddenly stepped forward. "Wang Shenming, is it?" Looking at Fu Jiuzhong, Shi Feng responded neither humbly nor arrogantly, "If you're talking about that home intruder, I am indeed the one who handed him over to the Green God Company. May I know what guidance you have to provide, Master Fu?" Chapter 2906, Combating a Mental Strength Master. Although Shi Feng spoke in a tone that was neither humble nor arrogant, the surrounding passers-by and Han Yifeng couldn't help falling silent, a hint of shock appearing in their eyes. That's the Infinity Master he's talking to. As he lost his mind. Han Yifeng felt his legs weaken when he saw Shi Feng's unyielding attitude. For longtime residents of the upper zone, mental strength masters were existences that shouldn't be provoked, all the more so a mental strength master with 2-star high-grade authority. Even the base layer's top-ranking organizations wouldn't dare to offend such an existence. Mental strength masters with 2-star authority could not only banish people from the upper zone for long periods but also teach those who offended them a lesson with little to no repercussions. While the Green God Company might penalize the mental strength master by deducting their trade points and contribution points, such penalties were nothing for a mental strength master of such caliber. Although Shi Feng's words and manner of speaking couldn't be considered offensive to Fu Jiuzhong, it was still a slap to the face for the Infinity Master. Han Yifeng failed to understand why Shi Feng would step forward himself instead of letting Qin Bai cover for him. In his opinion, Shi Feng's action was simply insane. At this time, let alone Han Yifeng, even Han Rongrong, who had been quite courageous before and even dared to challenge Shi Feng, shuddered involuntarily in fear. This was because a bone-biting chill was enveloping her entire body right now. Killing intent. This was a frightening killing intent Han Rongrong had never experienced before. The killing intent was so intense that Han Rongrong, a half-step Henglian Grandmaster, had the illusion that she would get killed the next moment. Her terror was so overwhelming that it had taken over her body, making her tremble despite herself. So this is the strength of a 2-star master? Weiyang Qianhen revealed an indescribably grim expression as she looked at Fu Jiuzhong, feeling somewhat uncomfortable before the Infinity Master's mental deterrence. She had sparred with Qin Bai previously, so she wasn't completely ignorant of the strength of mental strength masters. However, compared to Qin Bai, Fu Jiuzhong was on a completely different level. From sparring with Qin Bai, she had come to understand that his mental perception and brain activity were vastly superior to hers. If he was willing to pay the price, he could even increase his brain activity and perception sensitivity by more than 10-fold at will, allowing him to make inhuman reactions. Fu Jiuzhong, on the other hand, wasn't just capable of simply boosting his thinking speed. He could already influence others with his mental will. It was akin to employing powerful hypnosis on his opponents. Most importantly, this mental deterrence wasn't directed at her but merely spillover. She found it truly hard to imagine what kind of hell the actual target of Fu Jiuzhong's mental power was experiencing right now. Of those present, only Qin Bai fared slightly better. Even so, he was still affected by Fu Jiuzhong's mental deterrence. Damn it. It's over. Fu Jiuzhong has actually broken through to that stage already. There's no way someone who hasn't reached the level of a mental strength master can resist this mental deterrence. Qin Bai inwardly cursed this situation as he endured Fu Jiuzhong's mental deterrence. In Qin Bai's opinion, Shi Feng was an excellent seedling. Not only did Shi Feng become a neutralizing grandmaster at a young age, but his mental strength standard had already reached the peak of the special grade. According to the report he received, Shi Feng had even defeated several Honglian grandmasters simultaneously. With such ability, Shi Feng might very well be only half a step away from becoming a mental strength master. Originally, Qin Bai planned to learn more about Shi Feng and then introduce Shi Feng to his teacher. However, all of his plans were ruined now. Mental deterrence was something that liberated a person's deepest fears. For this reason, it was normal for the minds of people subjected to mental deterrence to collapse. If a person had weak willpower, they might even die on the spot. Even people with very strong willpower would suffer trauma when subjected to mental deterrence, which would impact their future mental growth. Normally, only 3-star mental strength masters could exhibit mental deterrence. Although Fu Jiuzhong's mental deterrence wasn't as strong as an actual 3-star master's, his use of this technique proved that he was already close to reaching the 3-star standard. He might have already taken a step into the stage. However, when Qin Bai turned to look at Shi Feng, he was stunned. How is this possible? Fu Jiuzhong had clearly directed his mental deterrence at Shi Feng. Yet, apart from wearing a slightly solemn expression, Shi Feng showed no fear or discomfort on his face. It was evident that he could withstand the Infinity Master's mental deterrence. In fact, he was enduring it much better than even Qin Bai. Ha! Fu Jiuzhong remained mostly unfazed even after seeing Shi Feng's reaction, sneering, "I initially had suspicions when I heard Tiendi say you might have become a mental strength master already, but I didn't think you had really become one." When Fu Jiuzhong finished speaking, everyone present turned to Shi Feng in disbelief. Han Feng in particular, was thunderstruck by this revelation. Is he still human? The first time Han Feng met Shi Feng, the latter was merely the guild leader of a large guild. Although Shi Feng possessed some strength at the time, it was still insignificant in Han Feng's eyes. The next time they met, Shi Feng had already become a resident in the upper zone, with a considerable amount of resources that could be traded for contribution points. Now Shi Feng had even become a mental strength master, an existence many corporations operating in the upper zone's base layer feared. Shi Feng's growth speed was simply out of this world. Han Feng wasn't the only one shocked by this revelation. Qin Bai similarly felt his heart pounding madly. A mental strength master under the age of 25? Previously, Qin Bai still had his doubts about Shi Feng being a mental strength master. However, since Fu Jiuzhong had said so, then it must be true. Nevertheless, he found it difficult to digest this information. Mental strength masters were special existences in the upper zone, the goal of countless young talents. However, typically, one could already be proud of oneself if one became a mental strength master by the age of 60 or 70. Qin Bai's achievement of becoming a mental strength master in his 30s already made him a rare talent that only appeared once every several decades in Yuantian City's upper zone. However, compared to Shi Feng, Qin Bai's achievement paled significantly. At Shi Feng's age, the growth rate of his mental strength was still at its peak. Only after the age of 30 would his growth slow than 5 years of rapid growth. If he continued developing himself, he could definitely become a 3-star mental strength master in the future, and possibly even reach the legendary Grandmaster standard. When Qin Bai thought about the possibility of introducing Shi Feng to his teacher, excitement filled his heart. However, before Qin Bai could grow excited for long, Fu Jiuzhong suddenly changed his tone and said coldly, "Your achievement of becoming a mental strength master might be excellent, but do you think you can behave arrogantly in front of me just because you've become one?" After saying so, Fu Jiuzhong suddenly punched at Shi Feng. Although Fu Jiuzhong had only executed a textbook punch in everyone's eyes, this punch seemed to carry the power of heaven and earth. The power of this punch was unstoppable, and everyone instinctively tried to run away. Not good. Qin Bai's expression immediately underwent a drastic change. Dodge it. Fu Jiuzhong's punch didn't just exude a mighty aura that daunted others' hearts. The Infinity Master had also removed the limiters on his body to exhibit 100% of his body's strength. Moreover, he had perfectly concentrated this strength into his fist. Even a bona fide 3-star master would have difficulty blocking this punch. It was evident that after seeing Shi Feng's true potential, Fu Jiuzhong intended to cripple Shi Feng to rid himself of a future threat. Shi Feng, the target of Fu Jiuzhong's punch, understood how powerful the oncoming attack was. Fu Jiuzhong's fist wasn't the only threat like most people thought. There was also the intent from the Infinity Master's fist. Although the fist intent didn't have a tangible form, it was by no means harmless. Moreover, even if Shi Feng could evade Fu Jiuzhong's fist intent, he couldn't dodge the punch itself. And although Shi Feng didn't know how powerful Fu Jiuzhong's punch was, he had a hunch that if he allowed the fist to connect, he would end up either crippled or dead. And worse, he couldn't stop the punch with his current strength utilization technique. This was because he was currently incapable of removing all of the limiters his brain placed on his body. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You know, I will not let things end like this. As Shi Feng watched Fu Jiuzhong's fist moving closer and closer to him, his brain raced, thinking of ways to block the punch. When Fu Jiuzhong's fist was only half a meter away, a potentially viable technique suddenly occurred to Shi Feng, a technique he had wanted to use in the real world all this time but couldn't due to physical fitness and mental capacity limitations. Block it. With a shout, Shi Feng concentrated the strength of his body and removed the limiters on his two arms. He then brandished his arms as if he were brandishing swords and instantly executed the sword technique he had used thousands of times in God's domain. Swords Transmigration. Chapter 2907. Taking on a 3-star mental strength master bang. Along with the sound of an explosion, the ambient air fluctuated, and even those standing more than 10 meters away from Shi Feng and Fu Jiuzhong felt these shock waves. The next moment, Fu Jiuzhong's punch came to an abrupt end, while Shi Feng stumbled several steps back before he managed to stabilize his body. The outcome of the initial confrontation between the two mental strength masters was clear for all to see. However, this result had Han Yifeng and the others looking at Shi Feng in shock and disbelief. He blocked it? How did he do it? Fu Jiuzhong's punch was akin to a behemoth's attack. One could tell how much power the punch carried just by looking at the shattered stone slabs under Fu Jiuzhong's feet. The upper zone's pavement was extraordinary, its hardness comparable to steel. Even a Honglian Grandmaster's full-powered attack would at most crack it. Yet, the stone slabs directly under Fu Jiuzhong's feet had basically disintegrated, while the adjacent slabs had web-like cracks spread across them. Fu Jiuzhong's punch could probably knock a car back over a dozen meters. The attack undoubtedly reached inhuman levels already. What did he do just now? Qin Bai stared at the uninjured Shi Feng in confusion. Compared to the other spectators, Qin Bai had a far better understanding of how much power Fu Jiuzhong's punch carried. An entry-level mental strength master would be fortunate to sustain only minor injuries from the punch, let alone emerge intact. Typically, if the average human removed all of the limiters restricting their body, they could lift an entire car. Meanwhile, Fu Jiuzhong was a mental strength master who had tempered his body over several decades. One could easily imagine how much power he could exert if he removed his limiters and concentrated all his strength into his fist. Of course, executing such a move would also place a huge burden on the body. If an ordinary person tried replicating Fu Jiuzhong's move without having absolute control over their physical body, they would most likely end up crippled afterward. This was because the limiters the brain placed was a form of protection for one's body. However, it was a different story for mental strength masters of Fu Jiuzhong's caliber. Currently, not only did Fu Jiuzhong have perfect control over his body's strength, but he could also freely turn his body's limiters on and off. So long as he turned off his limiters the moment he attacked and instantly turned them back on after executing his attack, he could minimize the damage to his body. He might even be able to offset the damage completely by using his body's resilience. And this was also what made 3-star mental strength masters so frightening. On the other hand, Shi Feng was evidently incapable of removing all of his body's limiters right now. Yet, by relying on a strange technique and incredible speed, he had successfully blocked Fu Jiuzhong's punch. More precisely, he had deflected the power of the Infinity Master's punch and received only part of the attack's power and impact. This feat was simply incredible. In reality, Qin Bai wasn't the only one surprised by this outcome. Shi Feng himself felt shocked and ecstatic. He never thought his plan would succeed. Although he had failed to fully replicate Swords Transmigration just now, the incomplete technique still allowed him to resist Fu Jiuzhong's full-powered blow. However, Shi Feng now felt his mind stagnating slightly, due to using Swords Transmigration with his mortal body. His brain had evidently overloaded itself to enable his body to execute the technique. He diverted my strength? Fu Jiuzhong eyed Shifeng in incomprehension. He couldn't understand how Shifeng's two strange chopping strikes had managed to scatter the power in his fist. At the moment of contact, he had felt some kind of power invade his body and deform his posture slightly. This, in turn, caused the power of his punch to plummet and allowed Shifeng to escape unscathed. Was it luck? Fu Jiuzhong shook his head, dismissing his thoughts. He promptly dashed toward Shifeng and executed a flurry of punches, giving him no time to catch a breather or create another miracle. Fu Jiuzhong had come to Yuantian City's upper zone intending to teach Shifeng a lesson, have Shifeng give up a significant portion of Zero Wing's shares, and avenge his student. After seeing Shifeng's potential though, he realized there was no way the young man would give up Zero Wing's shares. However, reconciliation between them wasn't possible after Fu Jiuzhong had sent the various corporations' experts after Shifeng. Fu Jiuzhong also couldn't forgive the arrogant behavior Shifeng took in front of him. Hence, only one path remained open to Fu Jiuzhong: crippling Shifeng and utilizing his mental deterrence to arouse Shifeng's inner fears. Even if Shifeng was a mental strength master, this would still leave an indelible trauma in his heart. If that happened, Shifeng's future as a mental strength master would be over. And while Fu Jiuzhong would suffer repercussions from the Green God Company afterward, the penalty wouldn't be anything severe. After all, there was no way the Green God Company would choose to lose a 3-star mental strength master after already losing a young talent. Fu Jiuzhong executed his punches with all his might, without a fixed pattern. Of course, with how fast his attacks were, Fu Jiuzhong couldn't concentrate all his strength into every punch. Hence, the punches he currently executed were significantly weaker than his first one. Even so, they still weren't attacks an ordinary mental strength master could receive. After images of Fu Jiuzhong's fists filled the space between Fu Jiuzhong and Shifeng. Even ordinary mental strength masters who could amplify their perception by more than tenfold, couldn't adequately capture every one of these punches with their senses. Is he nuts? Shifeng's complexion changed as he faced Fu Jiuzhong's attacks. Even an expert of Fu Jiuzhong's caliber would suffer serious injuries if he executed so many attacks without any limiters. The fact that he was doing so was simply ridiculous. However, Shifeng also had to admit that Fu Jiuzhong's attacks were effective. He could hardly keep up with the attacks, let alone execute swords transmigration to deflect them. When Fu Jiuzhong's punches were about to reach him, Shifeng gritted his teeth and liberated the limiters on his muscles once more. He then brandished his arms as if they were two long swords. Swords orbit. Bang, bang, bang. Less than 1 meter separated Fu Jiuzhong and Shifeng as they clashed in front of the Green God Tower. Although none of the surrounding pedestrians could see the arms of either mental strength master, the numerous thunderous explosions and shock waves made everyone feel as if they were standing in a storm. 2 seconds into the clash, Shifeng began retreating step by step, evidently at a disadvantage. And although Shifeng had successfully deflected all of Fu Jiuzhong's punches thus far, his complexion grew paler and paler as time passed. Let's see how long you can last. Fu Jiuzhong sneered when he saw Shifeng's poor complexion. Although Fu Jiuzhong was sustaining heavy damage by executing so many attacks with his limiters fully liberated, the damage wasn't unbearable. At worst, he would have to consume life potions for a month, but all his injuries would eventually disappear as if they never existed. However, it was a different story for Shifeng. If the young man failed to hold on now, he would be crippled in the future. The seconds ticked by one after another. Qin Bai, who was watching the entire fight, grew increasingly anxious. "Senior brother, is there nothing you can do?" Weiyang Qianhen asked when she saw Shifeng's ashen face. In a frustrated tone, Qin Bai responded, "I want to step in, but the fight between them is no longer at a level where I can intervene. I might even make the situation worse for Shifeng. All we can do is wait for teacher to arrive." Qin Bai wanted nothing more than to intervene in the fight, but he simply lacked the ability to do so. After all, even after pushing his senses to their limits, he still couldn't keep up with Shifeng's and Fu Jiuzhong's movements. If he charged in recklessly, he might get sent flying by some random attack. 10 seconds into the fight, Fu Jiuzhong's complexion began turning red, while Shifeng's turned deathly pale. A look of deep fatigue also surfaced in Shifeng's eyes, and it was evident he could last only a few more seconds. Die. Fu Jiuzhong accelerated his punches when he noticed Shifeng faltering. He planned to end the fight right here and now. Upon seeing this, Qin Bai reflexively closed his eyes, while Weiyang Qianhen's complexion turned grim. Just as Fu Jiuzhong's fists were about to overwhelm Shifeng's defense, a rebuke suddenly echoed in everyone's ears. Both of you stop fighting this instant. Although this voice wasn't deafening, it still stimulated everyone's mind and compelled them to obedience. Among those present, only Fu Jiuzhong, Shi Feng, and Qin Bai remained mostly unaffected by the voice. However, immediately afterward, an incomparably powerful mental deterrence assaulted Fu Jiuzhong and Shi Feng, causing them to stumble back several steps. This scene amazed the surrounding spectators, and everyone couldn't help wondering about the identity of the voice's owner. When everyone turned toward the voice's origin, what they saw were two people walking out of the Green God Tower's entrance. One was a beautiful woman with her black hair tied into a ponytail, and the other was a white-clad old man walking with a hunched back and a cane. Most of the people present quickly recognized the woman. She was none other than Xia Qingying, the base layer's general manager. The old man Xia Qingying was supporting, though, was someone unfamiliar to them. Only Qin Bai recognized the old man, and he couldn't help a look of panic and disbelief at seeing the old man. Looking at the approaching old man, Fu Jiuzhong gnashed his teeth and yelled, "Wen, I'm only teaching an arrogant kid a lesson. Are you going to interfere in this as well?" The white-clad old man's name was Xia Wuyuan. In addition to being the middle-layer general manager of Yuantian City's upper zone, he was also a bona fide 3-star mental strength master, someone with real authority in Yuantian City's upper zone. Rumor had it that he was only half a step away from becoming a mental strength grandmaster. However, for Fu Jiuzhong, who had just recently become a 3-star mental strength master, Xia Wuyuan wasn't in existence to fear. "Jiuzhong, this is Yuantian City's upper zone. Do you take this place for a joke?" Xia Wuyuan said as he glanced at Fu Jiuzhong. "This matter ends here. Shi Feng is already a talent Yuantian City's upper zone has set its eyes on. I won't sit still if you persist in making a scene." Xia Wuyuan's words thundered in Fu Jiuzhong's ears, causing his expression to turn ugly. Fu Jiuzhong then glared at Shi Feng and said coldly, "Consider yourself lucky today, kid. However, don't think you'll be as lucky next time." After saying so, Fu Jiuzhong got back into his maglev car together with Lu Qiandi and departed the area, disinclined to exchange any more words with Xia Wuyuan. "Teacher, are we going to let Shi Feng go just like that?" Lu Qiandi asked. With them having thoroughly offended Shi Feng, if they didn't cripple Shi Feng now, he would definitely become a thorn in their side with his extraordinary potential. After taking a deep breath, Fu Jiuzhong shook his head and said, "That old ghost is already close to crossing that threshold. I can't go up against him. However, that doesn't mean I'll let that kid off. After I apply for 3-star high-grade authority and get it approved, I'll have one chance to train in the core area and solidify my gains. Once that happens, that kid won't be able to stop me as easily as he did today." Lu Qiandi breathed out a sigh of relief at Fu Jiuzhong's words. If Fu Jiuzhong could train in the upper zone's core area even for a short period, he would definitely return stronger and would have a much easier time dealing with Shi Feng. Most importantly, Fu Jiuzhong could afford to do a lot more things once he gained 3-star high-grade authority. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Meanwhile, after Fu Jiuzhong and Lu Qiandi left, Shi Feng hurriedly approached Xia Qingying and Xia Wuyuan to thank them. If not for Xia Wuyuan's intervention, Shi Feng really would have succumbed to Fu Jiuzhong's attacks. "This little fellow has quite the talent," Xia Wuyuan thought to himself as he scrutinized Shi Feng. He then said, "Qingying mentioned you to me before. She said you were even more talented than Bai. I initially thought she was joking, so it is fortunate I had some business here today. Otherwise, Fu Jiuzhong would have crippled you. Thank you for helping me, Elder Xia." "Thank you as well, General Manager Xia," Shi Feng said as he looked at Xia Wuyuan and Xia Qingying nodding at Shi Feng. Xia Qingying said, "You really surprised me. Although I've long since known you would become a mental strength master sooner or later, I didn't expect you to break through in such a short time. It seems I didn't invite my grandfather here in vain." Shi Feng grew a little awkward after hearing Xia Qingying's words, unsure of how to explain himself. After all, his rapid growth was a complete accident. "Ahem, that's enough talking. You'll have plenty of chances to talk in the future," Xia Wuyuan said, faking a cough. He then looked at Shi Feng and said, "Kid, now that you've become a mental strength master, come with me to the middle layer." Chapter 2908, Middle Layer. We're going to the middle layer now? Shi Feng was a little surprised by Xia Wuyuan's words. According to his understanding, while one could indeed live in the middle layer once one became a mental strength master, one would first need to clear the Green God Company's internal test and review. One couldn't enter the middle layer simply on the assumption that one was a mental strength master already. After all, The middle layer was an incredibly important location for the Green God Company. Even the middle layer's official residents needed to undergo strict inspections every time they entered and left. When Qin Bai overheard Xiao Wuyuan's words, he was dumbfounded. Qin Bai still remembered that after he became a mental strength master, he had to go through an incredibly troublesome process to gain access to the middle layer. Yet, Shi Feng could enter the middle layer before even receiving the Green God Company's recognition. However, Xiao Wuyuan indeed had the authority to make such a decision as the middle layer's general manager. Even if Shi Feng weren't a mental strength master, Xiao Wuyuan could still bring him into the middle layer, just without official residential status. Of course. Although you haven't passed our internal test and review yet, the fact that you held your ground against Fu Jiuzhong proves that you are indeed a mental strength master, Xiao Wuyuan said, nodding. He then smiled and continued, since you are now one of Yuantian City's upper zone's mental strength masters, you naturally have to get registered at the middle layer immediately. Or are you telling me you don't want the middle layer's residential status? Of course not, Shi Feng said hurriedly. It will naturally be wonderful if I can get my residential status for the middle zone right now. The resources available to the middle layer's residents were beyond the reach of the base layer's residents. Specifically, he could purchase life water once he gained middle layer residential status. Good. Let's go then. After Xiao Wuyuan finished speaking, he waved his hand, and a maglev limousine marked with the Green God Company's logo descended from the sky. He then entered the limousine together with Xia Qingying and Shi Feng, and the three of them flew straight toward the mountain's halfway point. At this sight, Han Yifeng and the other corporation heirs aiming to enter the middle layer inevitably grew envious. Brother Shi's status is going to skyrocket now. Han Yifeng was filled with complex emotions as he watched Shi Feng depart. Han Yifeng had constantly been seeking to gain the privilege to live in the middle layer. Yet, Shi Feng now had this privilege at his fingertips. Shi Feng had even gained the attention of Xiao Wuyuan, the middle layer's general manager. Even after entering the middle layer, Shi Feng would not have to fear being targeted. What a pity. Qin Bai also sighed inwardly at this situation. If the middle layer's big shots found out about Shi Feng's talent, they would desperately try to get him as their student. Qin Bai's teacher wouldn't be an exception. Now though, Xiao Wuyuan had gotten ahead of everyone. A mental strength master, is it? I'll soon catch up to you. Unlike Qin Bai and the others, when Weiyang Qianhen saw Shi Feng departing for the middle layer, the urge to compete with Shi Feng bloomed in her heart. On the other side, Shi Feng's group arrived in the middle layer after going through multiple electronic scans and inspections. Upon entering the mist-shrouded area, Shi Feng felt a significant portion of his accumulated mental fatigue clear up. The middle layer's recovery effects were drastically better than those of the large mansion's environment. When Xiao Wuyuan brought Shi Feng to a mansion flanked by a lush mountainside and a small waterfall, Shi Feng was completely stunned by the environment. Isn't the environment here a little too amazing? It's at least twice as good as the environment I felt when I entered the middle layer. Even without doing anything, I can probably live up to 160 or 170 years old in such an environment, Shi Feng exclaimed as he experienced the changes the mansion's environment brought to his body. This is one of only 20 top-tier mansions in the middle layer. Let alone 160 or 170, a Henglian Grandmaster can live up to 200 here without any problems, Xiao Wuyuan said, chuckling. As the Green God Company's life technology continues improving, the lifespan of the middle layer's residents will also increase. Eventually, this place will let even ordinary people live up to 200 years old. As for mental strength masters like yourself, you might live to celebrate your 300th birthday. 300. Shi Feng was a little dazed. 300 years was already enough for a change in dynasties during ancient times. That's right. Although it is still somewhat difficult to reach such an age in the middle layer right now, the improvement is only a matter of time, Xiao Wuyuan said, nodding. However, if you become a mental strength grandmaster, reaching 300 won't be difficult at all. Are mental strength grandmasters that strong? Shi Feng asked in surprise. With his current physical fitness, even with the support of life potions in the middle layer's environment, he could, at most, live to around 200 years old. He dared not think about living up to 300. Yet, Xiao Wuyuan stated that a mental strength grandmaster could currently live up to 3 centuries. This was incredible. Of course. Mental strength grandmasters are much stronger than you think. They can exert 100% control over their brains. To ordinary people they are no different from gods. The Green God Company's creator was also a mental strength grandmaster, Xiao Wuyuan said, awe and envy appearing on his face. Feng was stunned once more. The Green God Company was the most influential corporation in the world. The combined influence of every other corporation worldwide couldn't match the Green God Company's influence. Feng never imagined that the founder of this corporation was a mental strength grandmaster. This was simply unbelievable. Seeing Feng's dazed expression, Xiao Yuan added, "You too have a small possibility of becoming a mental strength grandmaster. It is for this possibility that I brought you to the middle layer. Only by living here can you better develop your mental strength. Letting you remain in the base layer is simply a huge waste." Feng immediately came to a realization when he heard Xiao Yuan's words. It was no wonder Xiao Yuan brought him straight to the middle layer without undergoing the Green God Company's test. When Xiao Yuan saw Feng's contemplative expression, he smiled faintly and asked, "You're thinking that with your potential, I'm underestimating you by saying that you only have a small possibility of becoming a mental strength grandmaster, right?" Feng didn't deny Xiao Yuan's guess. In his opinion, if the Tier 5 concentration standard of God's domain represented the master standard for mental strength in the real world, then the Tier 6 concentration standard should correspond to the mental strength grandmaster standard. Meanwhile, Feng was relatively confident that he could get promoted to Tier 6 in his current state. After all, he had an ancient god's legacy. He even had items that improved concentration, such as the Soul Water and Crystal of Souls. Raising his concentration to the Tier 6 standard with the help of these items shouldn't be difficult. As if having seen through Feng's thoughts, Xiao Yuan said, "Even if your concentration reaches the Tier 6 standard in God's domain, you will still be a long way from becoming a mental strength grandmaster. According to God's domain's concentration categorization, the Tier 6 concentration standard is only equivalent to the half-step mental strength grandmaster standard. Currently, you are still far from becoming a half-step grandmaster, let alone becoming an actual grandmaster. You are, at best, close to the 2-star master standard. The Tier 6 concentration standard is equivalent to only the half-step mental strength grandmaster standard?" Feng was startled. Feng had experienced what it was like to have Tier 6 concentration thanks to the Light of Two Worlds, and the experience was amazing beyond imagination. With Tier 6 concentration he could suppress even ordinary Tier 5 existences with his mental oppression. Tier 4 players that weren't at the peak of Tier 4 would even lose consciousness on the spot. In his opinion, this should already be equivalent to the rumored mental strength grandmaster standard. Yet, according to Xiao Yuan, that wasn't the case at all. If Xiao Yuan was telling the truth, then Feng couldn't even begin to imagine how powerful a mental strength grandmaster's mind was. Can you not make it sound as if half-step mental strength grandmasters are very weak? I'll have you know that even Yuan-Tian City's upper zone has only 3 half-step grandmasters, while some of the other upper zones have only 2. Our upper zone is considered above average already, Xiao Yuan said, rolling his eyes at Feng. Also, I managed to assign you this top-tier mansion only because of one other person's recommendation. Otherwise, even with your excellent talent, you'd only get to live in a basic mansion in the middle layer. You'd need first to become a 3-star master to live here. Another person's recommendation? Feng grew curious. Most of his acquaintances in the upper zone lived in the base layer, and he knew none of the big shots living in the middle layer. You know this person. She's the person you've been secretly investigating. Her ID in God's domain is Phoenix Rain, Xiao Yuan said. If not for this girl's recommendation, you would have received a similar treatment to the other mental strength masters. Phoenix Rain. Feng was surprised. She's also living in the middle layer? What is her current condition? Feng had conducted plenty of investigations into Phoenix Rain. After all, Ji Lurong was very concerned about her elder sister. However, he never managed to find any information. He never thought that he would receive news of Phoenix Rain from Xiao Yuan. Moreover, it was even Phoenix Rain who had recommended him to the middle layer. I can only say that it isn't good. Apart from that, there is nothing else you should know right now, Xiao Yuan replied, shaking his head. To be precise, you still don't have the qualifications to know. Her condition isn't good? Feng fell into deep thought. After a moment he asked, Elder Xia, how do I get the qualifications you speak of? Originally, Feng didn't hold much hope of acquiring information about Phoenix Rain. This was because Phoenix Rain's situation definitely involved a huge secret. He was fortunate to obtain even this slight bit of information. But now that he was a mental strength master, if he could help Phoenix Rain he would naturally do so. After all, Phoenix Rain had helped him a lot previously. Phoenix Rain's little sister, Ji Lurong, was now an important member of Zero Wing as well. There was no reason not to help. If you make a significant contribution to the Green God Company and elevate your authority to the 3-star high-grade status, you can know a little more, Xiao Wuyuan said after giving the matter some thought. Significant contribution? Upon hearing that he had a chance, Shifeng asked hurriedly, "May I know how many contribution points I will need for that?" "Significant contributions cannot be weighed using contribution points," Xiao Wuyuan replied, shaking his head. "If you want to make a significant contribution, the only available avenue for you right now is driving off the Outer World's NPC army in God's domain. If you can do that, you might even be able to meet with her." "Repel the Outer World NPC army?" Shifeng frowned slightly at Xiao Wuyuan's answer. The Outer World's NPC army was different from the Outer World's player army. After all, the player army didn't even have a single Tier 5 player in its ranks. In contrast, the NPC army had Tier 5 NPCs and might even have demigod-level NPCs. Just stopping the NPC army's advance was already a difficult feat. Repelling it was simply impossible for the Eastern Continent's native forces. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You should stop thinking about this matter and focus on developing your mental strength, Xiao Wuyuan said. Although you've become a mental strength master and entered the middle layer, Fu Jiuzhong has already become a 3-star master. If he's really intent on targeting you, you'll probably have to spend the rest of your life cooped up in here. Outside of the middle layer, he'll have plenty of ways to deal with you. Shifeng nodded in agreement. Currently, the Infinity Master indeed posed a significant threat to him. If Xiao Wuyuan hadn't appeared today, Shifeng definitely would have suffered severe injuries. Moreover, he couldn't stay in the middle layer or upper zone forever, as he needed to manage Zero Wing's affairs in the outside world. "Elder Xia, may I know how I can purchase life water?" Shifeng asked. Shifeng might not be able to leave the upper zone right now, but with Fu Jiuzhong's status and pride, the latter definitely wouldn't stoop so low as to target Zero Wing's other members. After all, none of Zero Wing's other members could pose a threat to him. And if Fu Jiuzhong targeted Zero Wing's other members, the upper zone's other residents would look down upon him. However, Shifeng couldn't discount the possibility of Fu Jiuzhong having the upper zone's various corporations secretly target Zero Wing either. Hence, the first thing Shifeng needed to do now was let Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose recover. With their strength, protecting Zero Wing from Fu Jiuzhong's henchmen wouldn't be difficult. Chapter 2909, Soul Improves Purchase Life Water? Looking at Shifeng's slightly pale complexion, Xiao Wuyuan said in confusion, "Your current authority is 1-star high grade, so you're allowed to exchange for only 1 bottle per year. However, the main purpose of life water is to replenish life. With a mental strength master's regenerative abilities, you can just use the life potions or the meditation potions exclusive to the middle layer to repair minor physical or mental damages. Are you sure you want to exchange for life water?" "I can only exchange for 1 bottle per year?" Shifeng frowned slightly at Xiao Wuyuan's words. In Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose's current condition, they would easily survive for more than a year if they lived in the base layer's large mansion. However, Zero Wing couldn't afford to wait for a year. After all, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose had many responsibilities they needed to handle. This was especially true for the management of the guild's headquarters in the real world. Fire Dance and Lei Bao couldn't manage the entire headquarters by themselves. Not to mention, Fire Dance and the others would be coming to the upper zone to train soon. "There are alternatives available if you wish to exchange for more life water," Xia Qingying said when she saw Shifeng's disappointed look. Smiling faintly, she continued, "As you manage to become a mental strength master before the age of 30, the Green God Company will be giving you a reward." "A reward?" Shifeng immediately grew interested. "That's right. It is a reward for mental strength masters under the age of 30, Xiao Wuyuan said, nodding in agreement. "However, I do not recommend you use this reward to exchange for life water. This reward is something even 3-star masters desire greatly, as it can be used to redeem the privilege to enter and train in the core area, which is the top layer of this mountain. This privilege is for 1 month and it will greatly help in the development of your mental strength. Normally, only after a person becomes a 3-star master would they get an opportunity to exchange for this privilege, and it's for only 10 days. Compared to this privilege, life water is something you can redeem anytime. Are you certain you want to exchange for life water?" "Yes." Shifeng answered without hesitation. "All right then. I really don't know what's going through the minds of you young people these days," Xiao Wuyuan sighed when he saw Shifeng's determined expression, evidently dissatisfied with Shifeng's decision. He then turned to Xia Qingying and said, I still have to report this matter to the higher-ups, so I'll leave the rest of the explanation to you. Xia Qingying nodded obediently in response. After Xia Wuyuan finished speaking, he turned away and left the mansion, having no intention of continuing his conversation with Shifeng. Shifeng smiled bitterly at the old man's reaction. Don't mind it too much. Grandpa is just grumpy that you failed to meet his expectations. He doesn't know your circumstances, Xia Qingying consoled Shifeng after seeing Xia Wuyuan leave. Since you wish to exchange for life water, you need only 2 bottles, correct? I can exchange for 2 bottles? Shifeng was stunned. Originally, he thought that he could obtain only 1 bottle of life water as his reward and that he would have to spend trade points and contribution points to exchange for the other one. However, based on Xia Qingying's tone, it appeared that he could receive more than just 1 bottle of life water as his reward. This reward allows you to exchange for 3 bottles of life water. If you only need 2 bottles, I recommend you replace the remaining bottle with meditation potions. The meditation potion is more effective than the phantom potion and also functions to repair a person's mental state. Normally, a 1-star master can exchange for only 5 bottles per year. But if you trade in your 3rd bottle of life water, you can get 10 meditation potions. Okay, I'll take the 10 meditation potions, Shifeng said with a nod, astonished by the reward the Green God Company offered. This reward was hundreds of times better than what he received for clearing the mental path above the age of 20. Shifeng couldn't help being in awe of the Green God Company's generosity. Now he realized how valuable the privilege to enter the top layer was. It was no wonder Xia Wuyuan felt disappointed at his decision. Nodding at Shifeng's reply, Xia Qingying said, You probably can't return to the base layer anytime soon, so I'll pass the life water to those 2 on your behalf. As for the meditation potions, you can exchange for them through the mansion's storage room. I'll have to trouble you with that, General Manager Xia, Shifeng said gratefully. It's no trouble. This is also within the scope of my duties. You are, after all, a talent I discovered. If you perform well in the middle layer, it'll be of great help to me, Xia Qingying said, waving her hand. All right, I won't disturb your rest any longer. After saying so, Xia Qingying boarded another maglev limousine and departed the middle layer, leaving Shifeng alone to observe his top-tier mansion. Compared to the base layer's large mansion, this waterfall mansion had a slightly larger footprint. The waterfall alone occupied an area of 2 basketball courts. The water vapor coming from the waterfall was also incredible. Shifeng felt his body becoming refreshed after inhaling only a mouthful of it. The regenerative effects of this water vapor probably nearly rivaled those of the S-rank nutrient fluid without any side effects. This small waterfall was an unlimited supply of weakened S-rank nutrient fluids. If sold to the outside world, it could definitely fetch an astronomical price. Probably no corporation in the outside world would ever dream that something like this waterfall could exist. After all, S-rank nutrient fluids were incomparably precious to the outside world's corporations, with only a very limited amount available each year. In fact, even the corporations operating in the upper zone's base layer would never think of drinking S-rank nutrient fluids like water. After Shifeng finished marveling at the waterfall, he made his way into the mansion. So this is why anyone who has lived in the middle layer before would never wish to leave it again. Realization dawned upon Shifeng as he looked at the hall in front of him. After he entered the mansion and closed the doors, the sound of splashing water cut off completely. The mansion's sound insulation was perfect. In addition, the special energy flowing inside the mansion was twice as strong as outside. If ordinary people lived in such an environment, even if they did nothing but lie on the ground, their physical fitness would still reach the half-step Henglian Grandmaster standard. If they trained their bodies a little, developing their physical fitness to the standard of Henglian Grandmasters would be no trouble at all. Moreover, this special energy also had an effect on a person's mental state, allowing a person to remain mentally energized as well as maintain an ethereal mood. If a person trained in such an environment for a long period, even if they didn't become a mental strength master, they would be close. Shifeng could easily imagine how scary it would be to go from living in such an environment to living in the base layer's environment. The transition would be akin to being a billionaire living a rich and happy life in one moment and then suddenly becoming an ordinary person in the next moment. No ordinary human could possibly accept such a drastic change. It also explained why Fang Shihan was so adamant in preserving her middle layer reserve slot. So long as Fang Shihan could remain in the middle layer, her chances of becoming a mental strength master would be at least double than if she lived in the base layer. Is this the storage room? While touring the mansion, Shifeng noticed a small room made entirely out of some unique metal. When he entered the room and accessed the interface inside, he had to marvel at the Green God Company's financial prowess. According to the introduction displayed, the storage room housed all the resources available for exchange in the middle layer. This storage room even had life water stocked. Through the storage room he could immediately obtain the potion he wanted. He wouldn't have to spend time on a trip to the Green God Tower during emergencies. This was a great convenience provided to the middle layer's residents. Seeing this, Shifeng decided to give this exchange system a try. The next moment, several laser scanners scanned Shifeng's body and acquired his biometric data. After verifying his identity, the room's interface displayed the resources available to him. Currently, he had 10 meditation potions to his name, each worth 4 million trade points and 100,000 contribution points. 4 million trade points might not be anything to the base layer's corporations, but 100,000 contribution points was an entirely different story. Even the 5 States Corporation would have a heart attack if it had to spend so many contribution points on one item. For the time being, Shifeng chose to redeem only one meditation potion. According to the product introduction, the meditation potion had to be stored in a special environment. And if taken out of storage, it could last for only 1 day in the outside world. After 1 day the drug would lose its effects. Hence he should only exchange for the amount he needed. How interesting. When Shifeng spread his mental perception over the dark blue potion in his hand, he actually sensed weak mental fluctuations from it. Normally he would pick up such mental fluctuations only from living creatures. However, he didn't dwell on the matter, consuming the meditation potion immediately. After all, his mental state was in dire need of it right now. Shifeng had kept his brain overclocked throughout his fight with Fu Jiuzhong. While he had managed to smile and converse normally with Xia Wuyuan and Xia Qingying earlier, that was possible only because of his powerful willpower. If someone else were in his shoes, they probably would have passed out already. The moment Shifeng consumed the meditation potion, the scorching heat he felt in his brain instantly cooled. His complexion also rapidly changed from pale white to rosy. Amazing. This is simply amazing. Shifeng was dumbfounded when he sensed his mental state. With just one meditation potion, not only did he fully recover from his weakened state, but his mental state had also become surprisingly excellent. He even sensed faint improvements to his mental perception. These changes felt as if he had just consumed a crystal of souls from God's domain. With the meditation potion's effects, I will definitely improve further after consuming 10 bottles. This really makes a person wonder how the Green God Company managed to produce such a miracle drug. If this thing can be mass-produced, it will become possible to mass-produce mental strength masters. Shifeng was astounded as he looked at the 9 remaining meditation potions he could exchange. After recovering to peak condition, Shifeng promptly logged back into God's domain. Although he currently didn't have any good ideas on how to repel the Outer World's NPC army, he could share the news of Phoenix Rain's location and condition with Ji Lurong. This would at least give Ji Lurong some hope, and the girl wouldn't have to worry about her elder sister's whereabouts every day. Twin Towers Kingdom, Sky Spring City. When Shifeng entered God's domain again, he was surprised to find that his perception of the world around him had changed slightly. What's going on? Shifeng was greatly confused as he perceived the world around him. For some reason, his brain's recognition of God's domain was a bit different, and the world of God's domain now felt even more realistic than before. Is it because I used a combat technique in the real world? Shifeng could sense that his soul was stronger. This, in turn, directly elevated his concentration, which was previously almost Tier 5 advanced rank, to the Tier 5 peak rank. Now he was only half a step from Tier 6 concentration. However, before Shifeng could snap out of his daze, he suddenly received a call from Fang Shihan. Guild leader, are you alright? Fang Shihan asked worriedly as she looked at Shifeng through the video call. I heard you clashed with Fu Jiuzhong. Fu Jiuzhong is now a 3-star mental strength master in Haitian City's upper zone. Even if you're a mental strength master, your body will still be affected significantly after fighting with him. The existence of 3-star mental strength masters was no secret to middle layer residents. It wasn't difficult for the base layer's top-tier corporations to find out about them either. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You relax. I've made a full recovery already, Shifeng replied, smiling. He was even tempted to say that should he clash with Fu Jiuzhong again, he definitely wouldn't end up in as miserable a state as before. That's wonderful. Fang Shihan breathed out a sigh of relief. She then said, Guild leader, while you were logged off, the Outer World NPCs started their invasion. Several empires have already clashed with the Outer World NPCs and suffered heavy casualties. According to our estimates, the battle at the Twin Towers Kingdom will begin soon. So far, I've already contacted the various powers based in the Twin Towers Kingdom, Starmoon Kingdom, and several neighboring kingdoms that aren't embroiled in the war for a meeting in Sky Spring City. However, I'm not particularly confident we can get the neighboring kingdoms' player forces to cooperate with us, since the superpowers based in the engaged empires are doing their best to recruit them. Alright, I understand, Shifeng said, nodding. Also, tell them that our meeting venue will be changed to Starmoon City. Change the venue to Starmoon City? Fang Shihan was a little confused. While Zero Wing indeed possessed a guild residence in Starmoon City, the royal capital wasn't one of Zero Wing's main NPC cities. Hence, Zero Wing didn't have much manpower available there. Meanwhile, organizing the meeting this time required a lot of manpower. Not to mention, in terms of quality and quantity, Zero Wing's members in Sky Spring City were far superior to those in Starmoon City. If they held the meeting in Sky Spring City, Zero Wing could better display its current strength and raise the various player forces' confidence in defending the Twin Towers Kingdom. Set it at Starmoon City? Shifeng said in a determined tone. I understand. I'll notify them right away. Fang Shihan didn't pursue the matter. She then disconnected the call and began contacting the various powers. Meanwhile, Shifeng promptly teleported to Starmoon City and went straight to the War God's temple there. Previously, the branch temple Lord Howard Ragewind had promised Shifeng that he would handle all of the necessary procedures for Zero Wing to garrison Starmoon Kingdom. Now that so much time had passed, the branch temple lord should be mostly done. Chapter 29 10 Kingdoms Foundation. When Shifeng entered the War God's temple's first floor hall, a level 180 Tier 4 general manager approached him in a respectful manner. Upon seeing this sight, the players looking to pick up quests from the War God's temple turned to Shifeng with envious and curious gazes. Who is that guy? Why is the general manager personally receiving him? I recall some Tier 4 experts coming to pick up quests some time ago. That general manager didn't bat an eye at them, yet he's actually taking the initiative to welcome a player now. Could that guy be Black Flame? He must be Black Flame. I heard Black Flame always moves alone and loves concealing his identity. Out of all the players operating in Starmoon Kingdom, only Black Flame might get the general manager to treat him with such respect. Shortly after the players in the hall observed Shifeng's cloaked figure, passionate flames flared up in their eyes. They also began approaching him, hoping to take pictures or videos as mementos of meeting the legendary Sword Saint. After all, Black Flame was a living legend in the current God's domain. He was also the reason many new players had chosen to play the Swordsman class. In no time at all, posts with titles such as Sword Saint Black Flame appears in War God's Temple, and Sword Saint Black Flame seen in Starmoon City, began appearing on Starmoon Kingdom's official forums one after another. This situation rendered Shifeng speechless. He had initially used the Nightwalker's cape to conceal his identity. Nevertheless, these cunning players still managed to identify him almost immediately. Lord Sword Saint, the Temple Lord instructed me to give you this should you visit us, the general manager said respectfully as he proffered a rolled-up parchment. The contract's contents will take effect as soon as you sign it. After receiving the parchment scroll, Shifeng nodded and said, Please thank the Temple Lord for me. The contract the general manager handed Shifeng held the signature of Starmoon Kingdom's ruler. Once Shifeng signed his name on the contract, Zero Wing would officially garrison Starmoon Kingdom and become its representative guild. At that time, Zero Wing would be able to dictate the kingdom's development and even mobilize the kingdom's army. After reading the contract's contents, Shifeng signed it without hesitation. The sound of a system notification immediately entered his ears. System, congratulations. Your guild, Zero Wing, has officially garrisoned Starmoon Kingdom and become the kingdom's representative guild. Zero Wing will now enjoy a portion of the kingdom's management rights. At the same time, a system announcement rang throughout Starmoon Kingdom. Starmoon Kingdom Region System Announcement. Congratulations to Zero Wing for officially garrisoning Starmoon Kingdom and becoming the kingdom's representative guild. Zero Wing will now enjoy a portion of the kingdom's management rights. The system announcement echoed in the minds of the Starmoon Kingdom's players 3 times, triggering an uproar among the kingdom's players. What's going on? Zero Wing garrison the kingdom? Didn't they say that only the reserve guilds of God's domain's 12 great guilds are qualified to garrison a country? The sudden system announcement confused many players. Zero Wing's members, though, were exhilarated, especially the guild's new members. After this announcement, even a fool would understand that Zero Wing now had the final say in everything inside Starmoon Kingdom. Now, even the superpowers wouldn't dare interfere in the kingdom's matters. With this development, Zero Wing's newcomers could not only grind without worry within the kingdom but also gain access to numerous kingdom quests unavailable to other players. These kingdom quests would instantly resolve Zero Wing's concerns of developing its newcomers. Many of Starmoon Kingdom's player forces could already imagine Zero Wing's future rapid development. After all, now that Zero Wing had Starmoon Kingdom as a buffer, the guild could recruit new members without worrying about training resources. It wouldn't have to recruit only Tier 3 elite players and above. While elite players were indeed stronger than ordinary players, they made up only a small portion of God's domain's player base. And with Zero Wing's current size, the guild might be able to defend its existing territory, but it would face great difficulty if it wanted to expand. However, this development resolved Zero Wing's weakness. Good. I finally did it. Shi Feng smiled spontaneously when he saw the system notification. Immediately afterward, he left the War God's Temple and made his way to Starmoon Kingdom's national treasury. Guilds that garrisoned an entire kingdom or empire actually received a massive hidden benefit. Apart from the monthly tribute from the garrison country, representative guilds also gained access to the country's national treasury. A country's national treasury housed heirlooms that served as the country's foundation. And while players could exchange for these heirlooms using resources, they had to have the status of a Grand Duke in the country. Although Shi Feng didn't have the status of a Grand Duke in Starmoon Kingdom, he had the status of an elder in the War God's Temple. In God's domain, an elder of the War God's Temple sat higher than even the Grand Dukes of empires. Shi Feng naturally wouldn't have any problems exchanging for the heirlooms in a kingdom's national treasury. Meanwhile, royal heirlooms were far more valuable than what one could normally obtain through killing powerful monsters. They were items that could change the fate of an entire kingdom or empire. Hence, once a guild became a reserve guild of the 12 great guilds, dethroning it was incredibly difficult. In no time at all, Shi Feng arrived at the palace and reached the treasury unhindered. It was no exaggeration to say that the national treasury was the safest location in the entire Starmoon Kingdom. 8 level 180 Tier 4 NPCs stood guard at the entrance alone. Moreover, these 8 NPCs were no ordinary NPCs. Although none of them wielded a legendary weapon, they were all clad in fragmented legendary set equipment. In terms of individual strength, these NPCs were more than capable of holding their ground against ordinary Tier 5 existences. Apart from these 8 NPCs, there was also a level 200 Tier 4 Knight Captain stationed inside the treasury. The Knight Captain sported a legendary chest plate, and his combat power had undoubtedly reached the Tier 5 threshold. Most importantly, a magic barrier enveloped the entire treasury. If one wished to break through this magic barrier, one would need a force of 3 to 5 Tier 5 existences at the very least. Lord Sword Saint, may I know what business you have here? The Knight Captain asked respectfully when Shi Feng entered the treasury. I'm here to exchange for the items here, Shi Feng stated. Please follow me. The Knight Captain then led Shi Feng to the after descending 4 floors and walking for around half an hour, Shi Feng arrived in front of a secret room enclosed by a magic barrier. Sitting quietly inside the room was an old man who made Shi Feng feel pressured. A Tier 5 Grand Wizard? Shi Feng was a little surprised when he saw the old man. Starmoon Kingdom's foundation was far stronger than he expected. After all, apart from being a Tier 5 existence, the old man in front of him also wore a legendary hat. Ordinary Tier 5 existences who tried to invade the treasury would only get roundly thrashed by this old man. Lord Sword Saint, please enter, the Knight Captain said while respectfully gesturing for Shi Feng to enter the secret room. From the Knight Captain's actions, Shi Feng guessed that the other party could go only as far as the secret room's entrance. After giving the Knight Captain a nod, Shi Feng stepped into the room. Shi Feng immediately noticed the room's uniqueness. The environment here resembled the ancient era's environment, which was already rare in the current god's domain. Lord Sword Saint, since you have already signed a contract with His Majesty, according to the contract, you are qualified to exchange for one of the items here, the old man said as he looked at Shi Feng. He then waved his hand, summoning 3 items in front of Shi Feng. The founding king left behind these 3 items. These items are why our Star Moon Kingdom was able to rise up in the main continent. I hope one of them can be of help to you." When Shifeng saw the 3 items before him, his eyes bulged immediately. This was because Star Moon Kingdom's foundation far exceeded Shifeng's expectations, so much so that he wondered how a kingdom could have such a powerful foundation. The 3 items before him were neither inferior divine artifact ranked items or legendary ranked items. Instead, they were 2 designs and 1 recipe, and any of them could influence even an empire's development. The first to enter Shifeng's eyes was the design for a mysterious iron flying ship, which was many times stronger than the Crimson Dragon flying ship, an advanced flying ship. Not only was it capable of going up against Tier 4 superior mythic monsters, but its strongest attack even reached the Tier 5 intermediate standard. It could tear through the defensive magic arrays of cities like paper. Moreover, it had a maximum carrying capacity of 300 people. However, it cost a mind-blowing 1.5 million gold coins and 1 million magic crystals to exchange for the mysterious iron flying ship's design. The second item that drew Shifeng's eyes was the recipe of the Divine Power Potion, a Grandmaster Potion. As the potion's name suggested, players would gain divine power when they consumed the potion. For half an hour, players would have their tier elevated by 1, up to a maximum of Tier 4. Although Shifeng had heard of potions that raised a player's tier by 1, he had never heard of any that could raise a player's tier to Tier 4. Moreover, the potion even had a long duration of 30 minutes. In the current era where Tier 4 players were still as rare as a phoenix's feather, the recipe for the Divine Power Potion was priceless. Even an ordinary first-rate guild would become an existence feared by the 5 great super guilds should it get its hands on this recipe. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Meanwhile, this recipe cost 1 million gold coins and 1.5 million magic crystals. The last item to enter Shifeng's eyes was the design for a combat puppet, a secret silver combat puppet. Throughout both his lives, Shifeng had seen a secret silver combat puppet only once. In God's domain, bronze combat puppets possessed power at the Tier 3 peak standard. Even in the current God's domain, a bronze combat puppet was an incredibly powerful existence. Unless a Tier 4 existence appeared, a bronze combat puppet was unlikely to get destroyed. Above bronze combat puppets were mysterious iron combat puppets, which possessed combat power at the Tier 4 peak standard. They could go toe-to-toe against bona fide Tier 4 players. As for secret silver combat puppets, they possessed strength at the Tier 5 basic standard. Tier 4 existences would have a very difficult time destroying a secret silver combat puppet, and normally only Tier 5 existences could damage one. Meanwhile, the design for the secret silver combat puppet cost 2 million gold coins and 1 million magic crystals. Chapter 29:11 Heirlooms secured. Shifeng hesitated over the Star Moon Kingdom's 3 royal heirlooms. All 3 treasures could help a kingdom rise to prominence and a guild to reach the apex of God's domain instantly. Moreover, each had its advantages. "I can exchange for only one?" Shifeng couldn't help asking. "Only one," the old man replied with a smile. "However, if you manage to help elevate Star Moon Kingdom into an empire, you are free to exchange for all 3. Promotion to an empire? Shifeng shook his head and smiled bitterly. While he knew of a few ways to get a kingdom promoted into an empire, none of these methods was easy to realize. They all needed a long time to accomplish. After thinking up to this point, Shifeng suddenly had an idea. He then asked the old man, "What if I offer to swap heirlooms?" Heirlooms could be categorized into royal heirlooms, imperial heirlooms, continental heirlooms, and world heirlooms. In the past, the players that had the fortune to come across an unidentified royal or imperial heirloom would do everything they could to find the fallen country the heirloom used to belong to. Since these heirlooms were treasures left behind by fallen kingdoms and empires, so long as one successfully identified the heirloom, one could use it to re-establish that kingdom or even empire. However, locating kingdoms and empires that had long since disappeared from God's domain wasn't easy. The endeavor rivaled a legendary quest in difficulty. Take Shifeng for example. Although he had found an imperial heirloom very early into the game, he still hadn't managed to find any clues to the empire the heirloom belonged to. However, this didn't particularly surprise him. After all, at this stage of the game, players had explored less than 20% of God's domain's maps. Indeed, even now, the players of God's domain had explored barely 15% of the world's maps. In God's domain, human kingdoms and empires occupied only a small portion of the world's territories. Most of the two main continents consisted of level 150 plus neutral maps, and only after 40% of the game's player base reached level 180, tier 3 or above could players adequately explore these maps. Not to mention this was only the two main continents. There was still the vast ocean in God's domain, which held innumerable islands, some as large as kingdoms and empires. Hence, finding a fallen empire in God's domain was unbelievably difficult. This was why one of the top 10 rookie guilds in the past, which had acquired an unidentified imperial heirloom through an auction, had used this imperial heirloom to exchange for an identified royal heirloom from a kingdom. Afterward, the guild saw explosive growth and quickly became one of the reserve guilds of God's domain's 12 great guilds at the time. Although Shifeng wasn't sure how that guild had conducted the exchange, it would be a huge waste if he didn't ask if he could conduct a similar exchange. Swap heirlooms? The old man was a little stunned by Shifeng's question. After pondering for some time he said, "That's possible, but are you willing to pay such a huge price?" "What is the price?" Shifeng asked. "Firstly, you'd need to find an unidentified imperial heirloom. Secondly, you'd need to pay double the price for a royal heirloom," the old man answered. "Double?" Shifeng was flabbergasted. A royal heirloom was by no means cheap, and all three of the royal heirlooms before him cost upwards of 1 million gold coins and 1 million magic crystals. If this price were doubled, even superpowers couldn't afford them. That's right. However, the most important part is still the imperial heirloom. Without it, it won't matter how many resources you offer, the old man said, nodding. Deal. I'll trade an unidentified imperial heirloom for the mysterious iron flying ship. I'll also use my exchange opportunity for the secret silver combat puppet. Shifeng said, gritting his teeth as he took out the imperial heirloom sitting inside his bag. Before visiting the royal treasury, he had already taken all the funds Zero Wing could spare. However, he only had a total of 5 million gold coins and 3 million magic crystals on him. After all, the recruitment of NPC soldiers and the construction of defensive structures in Ancient Rock City cost a lot of money and resources. Although Zero Wing City and Ancient Rock City were raking in a significant income now, it still wasn't enough to cover Ancient Rock City's development costs. You actually have one. The old man was surprised to see the imperial heirloom in Shifeng's hands. Yes, so hurry up with the exchange. Shifeng nodded with an aching heart. All right. That will be 5 million gold coins and 3 million magic crystals in total, the old man said as he extended his hand to Shifeng. Verify the amount, Shifeng said as he transferred the necessary amount of coins and magic crystals to the old man's spatial bag. After verifying that the amount was correct, the old man waved his hand, and 2 ancient designs flew to Shifeng. When Shifeng saw these 2 designs, his heart pounded with excitement. Although purchasing these 2 designs had nearly bankrupted him, their value was immeasurable. Now, all he needed to do was gather the necessary materials and begin mass production. The materials needed are certainly extraordinary. Even the most common of these materials is incredibly rare in the current God's domain. Producing both of these items will also require a ton of Titan gold and magic elven stones. Veins of Titan gold ore were considered grade 2 veins in God's domain and incredibly rare, but they were the only way players could acquire Titan gold ore in large quantities. Other types of grade 2 veins produced Titan gold ore only occasionally. Overall, Titan gold was super rare, and just 1 ingot could sell for over a dozen gold coins. As for the magic elven stone, acquiring it had given Shifeng a headache when he was planning to construct the Crimson Dragon flying ship. However, the Crimson Dragon flying ship's construction cost was nothing compared to the mysterious iron-ranked Blue Thunder flying ship. Even if he excluded the other materials required, just the 5,000 ingots of Titan gold and 600 magic elven stones required would already cost a fortune. As for the secret silver-ranked Flame Beast puppet, its construction required 1,000 ingots of Titan gold and 200 magic elven stones. Both items required magic elven stones in significant quantities to produce. Fortunately, when Yenya and Cleansing Whistle returned from the ancient era, they had brought back plenty of magic elven stones. Currently, Zero Wing had a stockpile of over 4,000 magic elven stones, just barely enough to construct an adequate number of Blue Thunder flying ships and Flame Beast puppets. The only problem now was the Titan gold. Zero Wing only had around 30,000 ingots. While Shifeng was studying the 2 designs, Fang Shihan suddenly called him. Guild Leader. The guild leaders and representatives of the Twin Towers Kingdom and Starmoon Kingdom's various player forces have arrived. However, hardly any guilds from the neighboring kingdoms showed up, Fang Shihan said in frustration. None of the 2 superpowers came, and only 3 of the 8 first-rate guilds showed up. As for second-rate guilds, they number less than 20. This attendance rate was abysmally low. The guilds that came to help from the several neighboring kingdoms were fewer than the guilds in Starmoon Kingdom. Not to mention, neither of the 2 superpowers decided to show up. Are they all waiting to jack up the price? Shi Feng chuckled. He could understand the 2 superpowers' refusal. After all, the various superpowers had a lot of territories to cover, and they focused mainly on defending empires. However, there was no excuse for first- and second-rate guilds that weren't involved in the war to withhold their help. The only reason they decided not to show up at Zero Wing's war meeting had to be that they considered this a good opportunity to make a profit. If Zero Wing wished to get their help, then it would have to pay a price. Revealing a bitter smile, Fang Shihan said, "The first-rate guilds that aren't attending indeed have such an intention. In return for their full support, they are demanding the rights to purchase private houses and guild residences in Zero Wing City or Ancient Rock City. They say that the other superpowers have already promised them such conditions. However, if we agree to their demands, then they will choose to help our side instead." Shi Feng's act of devastating the Outer Worlds player army with a single attack had indeed caused a huge sensation in God's domain. It had also prompted most of the superpowers targeting Zero Wing to abandon their ambitions. Many of the Twin Towers Kingdoms and Starmoon Kingdom's independent experts had even returned to help in the 2 kingdoms' defense. Most importantly, the number of players seeking to join Zero Wing had also skyrocketed. Unfortunately, all these changes still weren't enough to persuade the unengaged player forces to help Zero Wing. This was because the Outer Worlds NPC army was more formidable than the Outer Worlds player army. There were multiple Tier 5 NPCs in the NPC army, and the upcoming battlefield would span a significant portion of the Twin Towers Kingdom's border. All sorts of siege battles and guerrilla warfare would take place, and there was no way Shi Feng could be present for every one of these fights. Moreover, the NPC army on the Twin Towers Kingdom and Starmoon Kingdom side was significantly weaker than the Outer Worlds NPC army. Because of mythology and Solar Temple's interference, the neighboring kingdoms uninvolved in the war didn't send their armies to reinforce the Twin Towers Kingdom and Starmoon Kingdom but to other kingdoms and empires. Hence, the NPC army defending the Twin Towers Kingdom consisted of the NPCs of only the 2 kingdoms. Although the Outer Worlds NPC army had split up into several dozen smaller groups and the detachment marching toward the Twin Towers Kingdom didn't have player support, this detachment could still put the 2 kingdoms' joint army through hell. Hence, a large number of players was needed to fight the Outer Worlds NPCs. And realizing this fact, the neighboring kingdoms' first-rate guilds naturally wouldn't miss the opportunity to get a cut of Zero Wing's resources. Good. Very good. Shi Feng smiled when he heard Fang Shihan's words. Tell those first-rate guilds that they can come if they want. But if they don't, then they can forget about coming to us in the future. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. This. Shi Feng's reply rendered Fang Shihan momentarily speechless. If she relayed Shi Feng's words to those 5 first-rate guilds, it would be no different from severing all ties between Zero Wing and these first-rate guilds. Meanwhile, the War of Worlds wouldn't end in just one day. As both sides continuously grew stronger and more numerous, it would end up a war of attrition between God's domain and the outer world. If Zero Wing rejected the help of these guilds now, it would have much more difficulty finding helpers in the future. After all, battles were taking place all over the eastern continent, and everywhere was lacking in manpower. It was also why the superpowers tolerated the various first- and second-rate guilds' absurd demands. Otherwise, the superpowers would have long since dealt with these large guilds. Shi Feng naturally understood what Fang Shihan was trying to say. He waved the 2 designs in his hand and smiled, saying, "Look what I have here." Chapter 29:12, Confidence. When Shi Feng took out 2 old and tattered designs, Fang Shihan initially discounted them. She still thought that his decision was too rash. While the 5 first-rate guilds in question might not have as many peak experts as the various superpowers, they still had over 300,000 Tier 3 players under their command, with some even having 400,000. Such a large force of Tier 3 players could influence the Twin Towers Kingdom's defensive battle significantly. Even the current Zero Wing only had around 1.2 million Tier 3 players, just the average for a superpower. However, after Fang Shihan took a look at the text on the designs, she immediately fell into a daze. Guild leader, are you playing a trick on me? Fang Shihan couldn't help asking. She had seen many treasures during her time in mythology. However, no matter how she looked at the designs for the Blue Thunder flying ship and Flame Beast puppet, she still felt as if she was dreaming. At this stage of the game, the 5 great super guilds had already acquired their own flying ships. However, those were only basic flying ships, which were significantly inferior to the Crimson flying ship, let alone the Blue Thunder flying ship. As for combat puppets, as far as she knew, mythology's strongest combat puppets were 3 mysterious iron combat puppets, which were used to safeguard mythology's main headquarters. Mythology had even tasked Tier 4 NPCs to keep a constant watch on these war weapons to prevent theft. Do you think I need to do that? Shi Feng chuckled when he saw Fang Shihan's skeptical look. He could understand Fang Shihan's doubts. Mysterious iron flying ships and secret silver combat puppets shouldn't be available to players at this stage of the game, let alone the designs for them. With these designs, so long as Zero Wing had sufficient materials, it could produce a plethora of these war weapons. And with the power of these war weapons, Zero Wing could devastate the entire continent. Sure. I'll go and reject those guilds now, Fang Shihan said, smiling. A hint of excitement also gleamed in her eyes. Although she had already grown accustomed to holding a powerful identity and position during her time as one of mythology's vice guild leaders, her heart still swelled with excitement and expectations. If Zero Wing could produce the Blue Thunder flying ship and Flame Beast puppet in time, it was almost certain to win the upcoming defensive battle at the Twin Towers Kingdom. Afterward, the 5 first-rate guilds and numerous second-rate guilds peacefully developing in the kingdoms neighboring the Twin Towers Kingdom received Fang Shihan's overbearing response. Fang Shihan did not embellish her message with any redundant words. Instead, her reply contained only one word: scram. The 5 first-rate guilds and many second-rate guilds were dumbfounded upon seeing this response. What arrogance! Zero Wing is simply too arrogant. Zero Wing isn't taking our 5 guilds seriously at all. When the guild leaders of the 5 first-rate guilds who had gathered for a meeting saw Fang Shihan's reply, they unanimously jumped out of their seats and cursed in anger. Before the War of Worlds began, the superpowers held incredibly powerful influence over God's domain, such that first-rate guilds like theirs could only bear with the injustice and live with their heads down. However, after the Outer Worlds NPC army invaded, the Eastern Continent's superpowers had no choice but to beg the first-rate guilds for help to defend their territories and routes. Yet despite facing imminent danger, Zero Wing actually dared tell their 5 guilds to scram. Zero Wing was simply tired of living. If Zero Wing wants to be arrogant, let it. The guild leader of Holy Seal sneered as he read Fang Shihan's reply. Once the battle at the Twin Towers Kingdom begins, we'll see how Zero Wing continues behaving arrogantly when it lacks manpower. That's right. Since Zero Wing looks down on us, we'll just help other superpowers. Zero Wing will live to regret its decision today. The guild leader of another first-rate guild said, nodding. If Zero Wing asks us for help later on, it won't get such a good price from us again. Many superpowers had already sent representatives to deliver invitations to their 5 first-rate guilds. Among them, Starlink's offer was particularly generous. Their 5 guilds had no need to worry about finding a superpower to employ them for their services. Their 5 first-rate guilds combined could field a massive army of 1.6 million Tier 3 players and 64 Tier 4 players. Apart from peak experts and apex experts, the alliance of their 5 guilds was not the slightest bit weaker than the average superpower. This was the basis of their confidence. Once their 5 guilds went to aid Starlink and Starlink's side repelled the Outer Worlds NPC army, Zero Wing would definitely regret rejecting their offer. And once Zero Wing came begging them for help, they would thoroughly bleed the guild for every penny it had. The other 3 guild leaders nodded in agreement, wanting Zero Wing to taste the misery of defending the Twin Towers Kingdom without their 5 guilds. Following this, the 5 first-rate guilds collaborated with the uncommitted second-rate guilds and accepted Starlink's invitation to join the Dark Knight Empire's defensive line. This sudden development caught even Lu Qiandi off guard momentarily. Young master, what do you think is going through Black Flame's mind? Yi Kuei asked curiously as he looked at the signed contracts he just received. The combined force of these 5 first-rate guilds is by no means weak, and even the super guilds over at the Fire Dragon Empire have eagerly sought their help. With how much these 5 guilds covet Zero Wing City and Ancient Rock City, even if Zero Wing allots only a small portion of those 2 cities' shares to them, these 5 guilds would probably agree to help Zero Wing. Yet now, Black Flame is just too prideful. He thinks that just because he is a Tier 5 Sword Saint and God's domain's strongest player, he doesn't need to fear the Outer World's NPC army, Lu Tiandi said nonchalantly. He doesn't know just how powerful the NPC army is. Once the real battle begins, even Tier 5 players will be nothing but a joke. If it were before Lu Tiandi had clashed with the Outer World's NPC army, he would have considered Shifeng's decision unwise but understandable. After all, Tier 5 players were many times stronger than Tier 4 players. It wouldn't even be surprising to see a Tier 5 player single-handedly destroy a city. However, after experiencing the Dark Knight Empire's defensive battle against the Outer World's NPC army, Lu Tiandi now understood that while Tier 5 NPCs were indeed powerful, they weren't invincible. This was especially true in battlefields that involved war weapons and Tier 4 NPCs using battle arrays. Every targeted city in the Dark Knight Empire would face at least 10 battle arrays formed by Tier 4 NPCs and around 500 Tier 4 NPCs. Even if a superpower dispatched all its Tier 4 players, it wouldn't be able to do a thing against such a force. Not to mention, Zero Wing was going to defend an entire kingdom by itself, so there was no way it could afford to concentrate all its Tier 4 players in one battlefield. Moreover, unlike the previous War of Worlds, the Outer World's NPC army had many more Tier 5 NPCs in its ranks this time. Just one Tier 5 player couldn't do anything against the Outer World's NPC army. A large number of Tier 3 and Tier 4 players was necessary to whittle down the NPC army and achieve victory. Otherwise, the Outer World's NPC army would simply trample over the Twin Towers' kingdoms, cities and fortresses. But this is good for us. If not for Black Flame's arrogance, these 5 first-rate guilds wouldn't have joined us, Lu Tiandi said, smiling. Starlink wasn't the only superpower defending the Dark Knight Empire. There were also Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul. Only the 3 guilds were separately defending their respective territories. If Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul failed to defend the NPC cities and fortresses they operated, both guilds would suffer a major setback. After all, both guilds had their headquarters in the Dark Knight Empire. However, while the Eastern Continent's various superpowers were discussing Zero Wing's unwise decision, Zero Wing continued operating as usual. The guild frenziedly recruited God's Domain's newcomers and sequentially developed Zero Wing City and Ancient Rock City. It also relied on the Tier 3 legacies from the Secret Covenant Tower to steadily increase its Tier 3 population. The 5 first-rate guilds' partnership with Starlink did not affect Zero Wing's operations at all. On the contrary, the number of independent experts coming to help defend the Twin Towers Kingdom even skyrocketed. This was because after Zero Wing garrisoned Starmoon Kingdom's NPC cities established direct teleportation links to Zero Wing's guild cities. This was a great convenience for players seeking to travel to Zero Wing's guild cities. The ability to teleport straight to Ancient Rock City was especially welcomed by players seeking to explore and raid the Orc capital city. Because of the popularity of this new teleportation service, Fang Shirhan created a bounty system for Outer World NPCs. Under this bounty system, players would receive 5 points for killing a Tier 3 NPC, 500 points for killing a Tier 4 NPC, and 100,000 points for killing a Tier 5 NPC. Players would also receive ranks according to the points they accumulated. Players that accumulated 100,000 bounty points would receive the bronze rank, which would entitle them to a lifetime discount of 5% on entrance fees and accommodation fees for all of Zero Wing's guild cities. At 1 million points, players would receive the silver rank and enjoy a 10% discount. At 10 million points, players would receive the gold rank and enjoy a 20% discount. After the announcement of this bounty system, over 1 million Tier 3 independent experts and 200 Tier 4 independent experts flooded into the Twin Towers Kingdom's border cities and fortresses from other kingdoms in just one day. All of them sought to accumulate Zero Wing's bounty points to reduce their expenditure in Ancient Rock City and Zero Wing City. The various superpowers grew envious over this situation and promptly adopted Zero Wing's ranking system. Only the results weren't as effective. While independent players were flooding the Twin Towers Kingdom, Shifeng gathered the Candlelight Trading Firm's elites and began frantically researching, then manufacturing the Blue Thunder flying ship and Flame Beast puppet. Manufacturing these 2 war weapons didn't require just precious materials but also high-level forging techniques, alchemy techniques, enchanting techniques and knowledge of magic arrays. Grandmaster-level lifestyle players had to take charge of the process. The Blue Thunder flying ship, in particular, required the cooperation of 3 Grandmaster forgers. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. In the current God's Domain, only the Candlelight Trading Firm could provide such manpower. Even after researching for an entire day, Feng and the others only managed to scratch the surface of the design. It would take several more days to construct a Blue Thunder flying ship. On the other hand, to Feng's joy, both Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose finally made a full recovery. Apart from losing some of their combat memories and having their combat standards weakened slightly, they experienced no other side effects after taking life water. Moreover, the two of them also succeeded in creating their Tier 5 mana bodies and got promoted to Tier 5. This increased Zero Wing's overall combat power by a large margin. On the fifth day, Feng and Candlelight's members were working on the Blue Thunder flying ship. Fang Shihan, who was responsible for the Twin Towers Kingdom's defensive preparations, suddenly contacted Feng, guild leader. The Outer World's NPC army has started moving. Chapter 29:13 Ye Blue Thunder Flying Ship, an army of more than 10 million NPCs? Feng was a little shocked when he read the detailed report Fang Shihan sent him. He had experienced wars between kingdoms and empires in his previous life. However, the kingdoms involved had pitted armies of 1 million NPCs at most against each other. These wars had also typically lasted over a month as the involved kingdoms conducted all sorts of battles to annex each other's land. This was because one of the conditions for a kingdom to become an empire was occupying a sufficiently large area of land. In the case of wars between empires, even if two empires waged a full-blown war with each other, the total number of NPCs participating would reach only 10 million. Yet, just one of the Otherworld NPC army's several dozen detachments had a force of 10 million NPCs, equivalent to the combatants of two empires combined. At their rate of advance, they will reach the Steel Lion Fortress, which is the closest to the border, in 2 hours. Fire Dance and I are on our way there with 800,000 Tier 3 players and 50 Tier 4 players. We should arrive within an hour. As for the two other targeted locations, Aqua Rose has garrisoned Thunder Gorge City with 700,000 Tier 3 players and 70 Tier 4 players, while Gentle Snow has garrisoned the Redthorn Fortress with 1 million Tier 3 players and 100 Tier 4 players. As for the independent players, they will probably make their way to these 3 locations soon. The good news is that, according to our investigations, not many Outer World players are joining the battlefield here, so we shouldn't face as much trouble as the various empires. We only need to focus on the NPC army. Border strongholds generally only had small teleportation arrays, which limited the number of players that could get through. Hence, Fang Shihan could only have everyone hurry over to these strongholds on foot when faced with the Outer World NPC army's sudden invasion. Feng understood their current predicament. Unlike NPCs, players couldn't stay cooped up in a border stronghold forever. They needed to grind for levels and better equipment. Hence, in preparation for the imminent war, most players had chosen to bind their return point to the NPC cities located closest to the border strongholds. Only when the actual war began would they teleport to these NPC cities and travel to the border strongholds on their mounts. I'll leave command to you all for now, but I'll hurry over to help afterward, Feng said. 1 hour. With his speed, he could definitely make it to the Steel Lion Fortress within an hour. Currently, the only thing the Blue Thunder flying ship lacked was the core magic array. So long as he finished engraving it, the mysterious iron flying ship would be complete. A mysterious iron flying ship could play a significant role in a defensive siege. Its importance even surpassed 2 or 3 ordinary Tier 5 existences. After Feng finished speaking, he promptly disconnected the call and began engraving the core magic array. The core magic array comprised 3 advanced Grandmaster magic arrays. These magic arrays were so complex that even a basic Grandmaster magician wouldn't be able to construct them. This feat should also be beyond Feng, who had gotten promoted to Grandmaster magician just recently. However, after his concentration standard reached the Tier 5 peak rank, his brain's activity and computing power had improved drastically. In addition, the core array's 3 advanced Grandmaster magic arrays shared some similarities with some of the magic arrays passed down through the ancient god's legacy. These factors made it possible for Feng to carve out the 3 advanced Grandmaster magic arrays. The past 3 failures occurred because of a mistake in the final fusion process. With my degree of control, the magic arrays carved should be perfect, so why can't I merge them? Is my control of magic arrays insufficient? Or is there another problem? Confusion filled Feng's mind as he repeatedly inspected the core magic array's design. He had already succeeded in engraving the core magic array without pausing, yet he failed to activate the magic array when he tried injecting mana into it. This was definitely the first time he had encountered such a problem. Typically, if players succeeded in engraving a magic array, the magic array would activate once it received a supply of mana. Only if there was a problem with the magic array would the activation fail. Guild leader, I keep getting the feeling that this core magic array is very strange. Melancholic smile suddenly said as she looked at the core magic array. Each of the 3 magic arrays in it is meant to absorb one specific type of mana, so why are they forcing these 3 types of mana to fuse afterward? The 3 elements have their own characteristics. How could they be merged into one? Currently, Melancholic Smile was only half a step away from becoming a Grandmaster Magician. And because she didn't invest her time in combat, the amount of research she conducted into Grandmaster magic arrays surpassed even Shifeng's. When she first looked at the Blue Thunder Flying Ship's core magic array, she already found the magic array strange. However, since the flying ship's design stated that the magic array should be constructed that way, she didn't voice her concerns. Now that the core magic array couldn't be activated, though, this proved that there was indeed a flaw in the design. However, Shifeng simply smiled when he heard Melancholic Smile's questions. The various elements of mana indeed have their own operating principles, and merging them is impossible. However, that's not the case for this extraordinary magic array. After absorbing ambient mana, the magic array will first break up the operations of these different types of mana. And before they recover, the magic array will influence them to operate under a new set of operating principles. Although the change will last for only a brief moment, the core magic array can, without a doubt, change the operating principles of mana. Something like that is possible? Melancholic Smile was startled. In her opinion, the operating principles of mana were unchangeable. Take the way some players forcefully manipulated mana to use skills. While these players might succeed in activating their skills, the result would have significantly weaker effects. After all, the mana they manipulated was actively resisting them. For this reason, players who had reached Tier 4 would try to activate their skills and spells by following the operating principles of mana instead of forcing mana to do their bidding. As Shifeng was about to explain further, he suddenly fell into a daze. I see. So, this is the Law of Destruction's true usage method. An ecstatic expression appeared on Shifeng's face as realization dawned upon him. Recently, he had fallen into despair, as he found himself stuck at Holy Annihilation's entry level. No matter how he tried to convert ambient mana into his own mana, the area he could influence only grew alongside his concentration. While this was indeed the correct way to manipulate mana, it wasn't the case if he was trying to make use of a world law. The reason Holy Annihilation could exhibit such devastating power was a complex destruction magic array designed for the mana technique. The fact that he could utilize the Heavenly Blue Saint's destruction magic array and merge it into various combat techniques and mana manipulation methods proved that he was starting to master the Law of Destruction. However, he still didn't truly understand how the destruction magic array operated. But Shifeng understood everything now. The Law of Destruction's essence wasn't to make mana disappear. Instead, it was to break the operating principles of mana, causing mana to lose its original effects. Hence, if he wished to grasp the Law of Destruction fully, he shouldn't be relying on the destruction magic array to guide mana. Instead, he should rely on his mind to halt the operations of mana naturally. Of course, it was easier said than done. Not only did he need powerful mental strength, but he also had to reverse the operations of different types of mana precisely. Only by doing so could he perfectly stop the operation of mana. At this point, Shifeng finally understood why the core magic array wouldn't activate. So, it is because the strength of my mana is too weak? Shifeng smiled bitterly as he looked at the engraved magic array in front of him. Mana was required to control mana. If a person lacked mana, they naturally couldn't manipulate ambient mana. If one wished to break the operating principles of mana, one would need incredibly powerful mana. Liquid mana wouldn't suffice. One would need solid mana at the very least. Shifeng immediately began concentrating all of the mana within his body, condensing it into a grain of sand that sat on his palm. He then injected the grain of solid mana into the core magic array. Boom! Along with the sound of an explosion, the Blue Thunder flying ship's core magic array came to life. The ambient mana surrounding the flying ship then began flooding the core magic array, becoming fuel for the flying ship's engine. System, congratulations. You have successfully created the Blue Thunder flying ship. Forging proficiency increased by 100 million points. Level increased by 2. Simultaneously, all players who participated in the Blue Thunder flying ship's production received a corresponding amount of EXP and proficiency. Although the amount they received wasn't as exaggerated as Shifeng's, it was still significant nonetheless. Currently though, nobody paid attention to the reward they just received. Instead, their eyes were all glued to the completed Blue Thunder flying ship. The Blue Thunder flying ship measured 500 meters from stem to stern, and it could carry up to 300 players at a time. It boasted 40 advanced magic elven cannons, each capable of launching attacks at the Tier 5 basic standard, and 12 floating crystal cannons, which could be used for both offense and defense. Offensively, the floating crystal cannons could launch attacks at the Tier 5 basic standard. Defensively, they could withstand attacks even from Tier 5 existences. In addition to these two types of cannons, the flying ship also had a main cannon capable of launching attacks at the Tier 5 intermediate standard. Lastly, the flying ship's flight speed was comparable to that of Tier 5 extraordinary flying mounts. Twin Towers Kingdom Steel Lion Fortress. Assembled atop the Steel Lion Fortress's 50-meter-tall steel walls were more than 300,000 level 150-plus, Tier 3 NPCs, all geared in level 150-plus dark gold equipment. These NPCs were without a doubt the cream of the crop of the Twin Towers Kingdom's army. There were also close to 30 Tier 4 NPCs standing on the wall, and the one leading these Tier 4 NPCs was a level 200 Tier 4 Sky Knight. The Sky Knight was a man who appeared to be in his late 50s, clad in a complete set of fragmented legendary set equipment. The aura he exuded was comparable to that of an ordinary Tier 5 NPC. Apart from the fortress walls, there were also 24 Tier 4 NPCs chanting an incantation inside the fortress's core control room. Because of these magical class NPCs' manipulation, the fortress's defensive magic array, which used to have only one layer, was now a threefold magic array instead. Even a Tier 5 existence on a rampage wouldn't be able to destroy it. At most, the other party would merely expend some of the fortress's energy supply. A total of 30 magic cannon towers rose above the fortress, and more than 600 large destruction ballistas were set up on the fortress walls. In the sky, 10 flying ships hovered over the fortress, 9 advanced rank and 1 bronze rank. Alongside these flying ships were over 100 Tier 3 and Tier 4 flying mounts. The sight was simply spectacular and absolutely not something anyone would get to see very often. More than 2 million players gathered in the fortress, making the Steel Lion Fortress incredibly crowded. At this moment, though, none of the players inside the Steel Lion Fortress felt relaxed or excited. This was because some distance from the Steel Lion Fortress was an army of over 3 million NPCs, and the number of Tier 4 NPCs in that army exceeded 500. It came bearing various siege weapons, large catapults and advanced mana pulse cannons, which easily numbered more than 1,000. Meanwhile, hovering above this outer-world NPC army were more than 50 flying ships. 6 of them were bronze flying ships while the rest were advanced flying ships. In combination with the 500-plus Tier 3 and Tier 4 flying mounts, they practically blotted out the entire sky. The disparity in combat power between the two sides was clear for all to see. Even the players who came to spectate and conduct a live broadcast of the battle wore gloomy expressions when they saw the Outer Worlds NPC army. On the Twin Towers Kingdom's forums, the live broadcasts caused an uproar among the Kingdom's players. Is this the Outer World's real strength? Can we really hold the Twin Towers Kingdom? Although many of the Twin Towers Kingdom's players had heard bits of information regarding the battles that had taken place at the various empires, the most they got were rumors and some pictures. They didn't have a clear understanding of the Outer World NPC army's true might. Moreover, as players of another country, they previously considered these battles none of their business. However, after seeing the army outside the Steel Lion Fortress, they felt an indescribable sense of despair. The players standing inside the Steel Lion Fortress especially understood what a war between kingdoms and a war of worlds entailed. Battles between players were nothing compared to a war between worlds. The next moment, amid the anxiety and despair of the Twin Towers Kingdom's players, the commander of the Outer Worlds NPC army raised his right hand and swung it forward. Following his actions, both the war weapons on the ground and the flying ships and flying mounts in the sky began advancing. Activate all defenses. Everyone prepare for battle. The Steel Lion Fortress's commander, Sky Knight Seppel, shouted as he raised his long sword. In response to Seppel's command, the NPCs within the fortress armed the magic cannon towers and large destruction ballistas, knocked their bows and chanted incantations. Shortly afterward, the first exchange between the two sides took place. The sky instantly turned into a sea of flames as explosions of varying degrees shook the sky and the ground. The explosions were so deafening that all of the players inside the fortress felt their heads ring. After taking a look at the burning battlefield, Fang Shihan, who stood atop the fortress wall, turned to the players below the wall. Using a voice amplification spell, she ordered calmly, "Everyone don't panic. Move as we've planned. Ranged players head up the walls. Melee players, move to the agreed-upon defensive points. Once the magic barrier breaks, it will be your turn to attack with everything you've got. We must prevent the Outer World's NPCs from destroying the core magic array at all costs until the magic barrier recovers. So long as we can hold our ground, those Outer World NPCs will be forced to retreat sooner or later." The fortress's defensive magic array wasn't invincible. In the face of such a powerful offensive, it was only a matter of time before it shattered. Meanwhile, what players like themselves needed to do during this battle was protect the fortress's core magic array while the defensive magic array was down, and buy as much time as possible until the defensive magic array came back online. They would also try to kill as many Outer World NPCs as possible during this time. Once they repeated this cycle a few times, the Outer World's NPC army would eventually have to retreat. When Fang Shihan finished speaking, many of the players present calmed down, and confidence rekindled in their hearts. NPCs had a very difficult time getting resurrected, and even more so in an intense battle like this. However, it was a different story for players like themselves. If they died, they could be resurrected quickly and rejoin the battle. If there was a healer nearby, they could even be resurrected on the spot at the cost of some EXP. However, 3 minutes after Fang Shihan finished speaking, the sound of glass shattering entered everyone's ears. This sound originated from none other than the Steel Lion Fortress's defensive magic array. "Vanguard, charge!" the Outer World Army's commander commanded. Immediately, the Outer World's Tier 3 NPCs began charging toward the Steel Lion Fortress in a frenzy. As for the Outer World's Tier 4 NPCs, they flew straight for the Fortress Lord's mansion, attracting the Steel Lion Fortress's Tier 4 NPCs to intercept them. "Trap those Tier 4 NPCs with magic barriers," Fang Shihan hurriedly commanded when she saw the hundreds of Tier 4 NPCs and flying mounts heading into the fortress. "All melee players, stop those Tier 3 NPCs from entering the fortress." At Fang Shihan's command, Zero Wings members promptly deployed the master magic barriers they had prepared, trapping more than half of the Outer World NPCs and flying mounts and isolating them into over a dozen different combat zones. Immediately afterward, the Tier 4 players cooperated with the fortress's Tier 4 NPCs to engage the Outer World's Tier 4 NPCs and flying mounts. As for the Tier 3 melee players, they cooperated with the fortress's Tier 3 NPCs to stop the Outer World's Tier 3 NPCs outside the wall. For a time, sounds of battle rang out from all over the Silver Lion Fortress, originating from individual battles, group battles, and one-sided slaughters. On the ground, the fortress's Tier 3 players were holding up pretty well against the Outer World's Tier 3 NPCs. Although there was indeed a difference in levels and equipment between the two sides, the Tier 3 players managed to mitigate this difference by relying on their superior combat standards and coordination with other players. The difference in numbers between the two sides wasn't overwhelming either. So, the fortress's Tier 3 players managed to trade at a relatively good ratio of 2-8 with the Outer World's Tier 3 NPCs, with 2 Outer World NPCs dying for every 8 fortress players. This was undoubtedly a beneficial outcome for the players. However, in the aerial battle, the Twin Towers Kingdom's side had fallen into an absolute disadvantage. Setting aside the difference in the number of flying ships and flying mounts the two sides possessed, just the difference in the number of Tier 4 combatants already posed an insurmountable gap. And worse, the fortress's magic cannon towers were hardly of any use against the Outer World's Tier 4 combatants. Moreover, if not for Fire Dance, Violet Cloud, and Yen Qianxing working together to hold off the leader of the Outer World Army's vanguard, a level 180 Tier 5 NPC, the advanced master barriers trapping and suppressing more than half of the Outer World's Tier 4 NPCs would have long since been shattered. As for the other Tier 4 experts, apart from those at the Void Realm standard or above, everyone else couldn't even put up a fight against the Outer World's Tier 4 NPCs. The difference in the number of Tier 4 combatants is too great. No wonder the superpowers in the empires are losing fights one after another. At this rate, it won't take more than 10 minutes before the core magic array is destroyed. After killing a level 180 Tier 4 Great Wizard, Fang Shihan glanced at Kola and White Feather, who were doing their best to stop attacks from reaching the Fortress Lord's mansion. When she saw they faced a dozen or so Tier 4 NPCs, she felt powerless. On her side, she only had to handle 3 level 180 tier 4 NPCs by herself, so she could more or less cope. As for Cola and White Feather, they might not have any problem holding off a dozen or so tier 4 NPCs by relying on their skills and techniques for now, but that would remain true only while they had skills to use. Not to mention, this wasn't all the Outer World army had to offer. It had over 500 tier 4 NPCs in total and even tier 5 NPCs leading it. The disparity between the Twin Towers Kingdom's army and the Outer World's army was utterly demoralizing. After some more time passed, 8 of the Twin Towers Kingdom's tier 4 NPCs and more than 20 tier 4 players fell. In contrast, the Outer World army lost only 6 tier 4 NPCs, 3 of which were Fang Shihan's kills. The stark difference between the two sides plunged the tier 4 players into despair. Keep fighting. We must not retreat on our first battle. Fang Shihan bellowed when she saw her people's demoralized expressions. Even if we die, we must make these Outer World NPCs pay a sufficient price. Fang Shihan wasn't too surprised that the Steel Iron Fortress's defenses were crumbling. The disparity between the Outer World's army and the Twin Towers Kingdom's army was simply too immense. The only way the Twin Towers Kingdom could emerge victorious was by whittling down the Outer World's army through multiple battles at multiple strongholds. However, the first battle was also when the Twin Towers Kingdom's combat power was at its peak. If the Twin Towers Kingdom failed to deplete a significant portion of the Outer World's army's forces, the subsequent battles would be even more difficult. As soon as Fang Shihan finished speaking, however, the Outer World army's commander, who rode on one of the bronze flying ships, stood up and suddenly released a frightening aura that enveloped the Steel Lion Fortress. Upon coming into contact with this aura, all the players within the fortress felt their heartbeats accelerate and their bodies grow heavier. It was evident that the Outer World army's commander no longer intended to watch from the sidelines and would now enter the battlefield. A level 200 tier 5 Holy Grail Knight? A solemn expression appeared on Fang Shihan's face when she saw the enemy commander walking step by step in the air. The aura the enemy commander radiated was significantly stronger than what the enemy's vanguard leader radiated. Moreover, he even wielded a legendary greatsword. The enemy commander probably stood at the top even among tier 5 existences. If the Steel Lion Fortress's defenders had to clash against such an existence, their defensive line would probably crumble in an instant. When the other players saw the enemy commander taking the field himself, none of them had any doubts that this siege battle was over. However, just as the enemy Holy Grail Knight arrived above the Steel Lion Fortress and was about to take action, a deafening roar suddenly came from the distant sky. Before anyone could turn toward the source of the noise, a dark blue behemoth arrived in the airspace above the fortress like a lightning bolt. Both players and NPCs present were startled by the dark blue behemoth's sudden appearance. A flying ship? Is that really a flying ship? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The flying ship above them was simply massive. Even the bronze flying ships, which measured close to 200 meters in length, looked like infants beside the dark blue behemoth. Moreover, this dark blue behemoth distorted the space around it just by hovering in place. The mana within and around the Steel Lion Fortress gathered fervently around this dark blue behemoth, and even the Outer World army's vanguard commander had the mana in his mana domain drawn away. As the dark blue behemoth began descending toward the fortress, a man wearing a black cloak walked to the bow of the flying ship. Upon seeing this man, the players in the fortress immediately burst into cheers. "Guild leader, you're finally here," Fang Shihan said in a disgruntled tone as she looked at the man standing atop the dark blue behemoth. Shi Feng had promised to arrive at the Steel Lion Fortress before the battle began, yet he showed up only after they had been fighting for some time. "Sorry for the long wait, everyone," Shi Feng said apologetically as he looked at Fang Shihan and the others. He then shifted his gaze to the Outer World NPC army and smiled, saying, "Now that I'm here, leave the rest to me." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.